Chapter 296. The Frost Kingdom Arendelle. Princess Anna's pretty figure stood at the top of the castle, looking down at the city in front of her. At this moment, the temperature had begun to warm up, and the ice and snow were showing signs of melting. Arendelle was still as lively as before, but there was a tense and depressing atmosphere spreading in the palace. This was something that had never happened before, but now the whole castle was heavily guarded. Because Princess Royal had left. If Princess Royal was still in Arendelle, it wouldn't matter even if there were no guards in the entire palace. But now that Princess Royal had left, the security of the palace needed guards to protect it. In fact, no one thought that Princess Royal would leave so suddenly. Even Princess Anna didn't think that her sister would disappear without a trace after giving her a few simple words. No one knew where she went. Maybe she was no longer in the current world, but somewhere they didn't know. My sister has been away for 3 days. Princess Anna looked at the harbor in the distance, turned to look at the captain behind her and whispered, "I don't know where my sister went, and why she left in such a hurry this time." The captain behind her didn't answer but whispered, "Her Majesty the Queen must have left for something important. Your Royal Highness doesn't have to worry too much. After all, there are very few people in this world who can threaten Her Majesty the Queen." Princess Anna nodded gently and said slowly, "I know. I just miss my sister a little. I used to think that the person I missed the most was him, but after my sister left, I realized that the person I cared about the most in my heart was still my sister. If she was there, I would feel very relaxed as if I didn't care about anything. No matter what I did wrong, my sister would help me deal with it. But now that she suddenly left, a lot of things are suffocating me. I'm worried that I'll do something wrong and mess up Arendelle." The captain glanced at her and said softly, "Princess Anna has been doing very well." Ta-ta-ta. Just as she finished speaking, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside, and then a panting voice said, "Not good, Your Royal Highness. The pirates in Iceland seem to be making some strange movements. The fleets of the southern islands also seem to be up to no good. They seem to be colluding with each other and are approaching our waters." Patter. It sounded like something had fallen to the ground and broken. Then there was a series of hurried footsteps. Soon, several fully armored generals entered the palace. About 15 minutes later, the palace wizards of Arendelle also gathered. The ice witches all came to the palace hall and seemed to be arguing about something. The guards outside would eavesdrop from time to time. Although he didn't understand a lot of things and didn't hear the complete story, he felt that a war was about to break out in Arendelle. It had been 20 years. Ever since Princess Royal was born, Arendelle had never been involved in a war. Now that Princess Royal had just left, the dark clouds of war were approaching. This caused people to feel a trace of unease. Soren stood on the deck and stared at the sea. After a while he took out a gold coin from his pocket and played with it. This gold coin was about the same weight as an ordinary kindler, but the pattern on it was different. This was because the pattern on it was not the goddess of wealth, but the oldest goddess of luck. As for the mysterious runes on the back of the gold coin, Soren didn't recognize them at all. As a wizard he was too unprofessional. A lot of things were half-baked and he didn't have enough time to learn them. But Soren wasn't completely out of ideas. He actually had a simpler way to unlock the secret of this gold coin, but the cost was slightly higher. Pay 7,000 slaughter EXP. Soren actually knew from the beginning that this gold coin seemed to have some kind of sealing power, but he didn't want to give up so much slaughter EXP. But after thinking about it carefully, he decided to pay the slaughter EXP because this should be a legendary special item. When Soren first touched it he felt an electric current. He didn't know if it had anything to do with the blessing of the goddess of misfortune on him. After all, the goddess of luck and the goddess of misfortune appeared from the corpse of the goddess of luck. A faint light appeared. The gold coin in Soren's palm seemed to have a layer of fog lifted, emitting a strange golden light, and then gradually calming down. Item type: Lucky Gold Coin number 3, Item Grade. Grade 3 Legendary Item. Item Description: This is a very special lucky gold coin. It is said that it was originally created by the goddess of luck. It carries the blessing of the goddess of luck and can bring good luck to the owner. There are a total of 12 of these gold coins. It is said that after collecting all 12 gold coins, an even more amazing secret can be found. But it seems that no one has collected all of these lucky gold coins so far. Only 1 or 2 lucky gold coins would appear occasionally, and in the end they would be obtained by other epic heroes. It seems that these lucky gold coins have a special connection with the legendary Card of Fate. The legendary Great Arcanists seem to have researched the mysterious field of luck as well. Requirements: none. Special effect, Hero's Luck. When holding this gold coin, any owner will receive the ability Hero's Luck. When triggering any test, whether it's attack, dodge, hit, immunity, negotiation, or any other field, the owner of the lucky gold coin will permanently receive 1 point of luck bonus. Note: legend has it that the goddess of luck and the goddess of misfortune are also looking for these gold coins. Give them to the priests of the two goddesses first and you can receive their rewards. Lucky gold coin. This was the data that Soren identified after unsealing it. It seemed to be a legendary item that couldn't increase combat power too much, but it seemed to be quite useful. In the simplest way, this lucky gold coin could provide a special effect of luck +1. This kind of luck bonus could be used in any field, whether it was attack, dodge, immunity, etc. It could give an additional 1 point of luck bonus. It was possible that an enemy that couldn't be hit in battle would suddenly be hit because of a little bit of luck, and an attack that couldn't be avoided would suddenly be dodged by falling down. Who knew about this thing called luck? From a personal point of view, Soren felt that it should be very useful. But he didn't know if the effect of this lucky gold coin could be stacked because according to the description, there were a total of 12 lucky gold coins. If the effect of this lucky gold coin could be stacked, then after all of them were collected, there would be an additional 12 points of luck bonus. This was a rather frightening thing. It could be said that he was a born protagonist with good luck. When he went out and picked up money, he could do whatever he wanted and the enemy would coincidentally bump into him. It seemed that since ancient times, only the gods who were in charge of luck could increase someone's luck to such a degree, right? According to the past data conversion, 2 points of strength can provide 1 point of attack bonus, 2 points of agility can provide 1 point of evasion bonus, and 2 points of physique can provide 1 point of tenacity bonus. According to this calculation, all judgments can get 1 point of luck bonus, and the real effect of the conversion is quite amazing. Strength, agility, physique, perception, intelligence, charm. These 6 attributes all affected the judgment effect. If converted in this way, it was equivalent to getting 12 attribute points of judgment bonus as a reward. The effect was amazing when he thought about it carefully. Soren played with the lucky gold coin in his hand and put it away. It seemed that both the goddess of fortune and the goddess of misfortune wanted this thing. He didn't know what the hidden secret was. The next day, Soren came to Shipwreck Bay. There were not as many things here as in Port Tylon. He came mainly for the slave trade. There were too many indigenous slaves in the outer islands. These indigenous people were wild and untamed and did not know how to farm. If they wanted to develop and grow, the slaves on the mainland would be more useful because most of the slaves on the mainland knew how to do deep farming. In other words, fine farming. Recently, the situation on the mainland had become more and more chaotic. Many nobles took advantage of the situation and annexed the land, turning many civilians who originally owned land into the proletariat. Some of them were directly reduced to slaves. Now the slave market on the south coast was quite popular, and there were people selling themselves as slaves almost every day. In addition, the price of food seemed to have risen by nearly 50%. Many people smelled something wrong. They were either desperately buying food or stopping selling food and hoarding goods. This kind of basic food had risen by half, and the impact on the lower class of the poor was even greater. Especially now, when there was a shortage of manpower. Soren kept these changes in mind, but he didn't care about the food problem at all. He had long known that the closer it was to the period of turmoil, the higher the price of food would be, so he bought a lot of food supplies in advance. The buyers behind the scenes of the bulk food trade in Port Tylon were all Soren's men. At present, the food he had hoarded was enough to support him for a long time. After explaining the slave trade, Soren continued to go to the north along the sea route. However, what made him quite surprised and a little dumbfounded was that because he had brought a lot of gifts to Gloria in the north this time, and because of the assassination attempt by the legendary assassin, he was very careful not to show his flag this time. Then he was robbed. The ones who wanted to rob them were the northern pirates, a group of fierce pirates without much organization. The most powerful pirates in the north were in Iceland. These pirates that Soren encountered were the kind that was small because the core of the northern sea trade route was in Arendelle. That was the real rich route. Chapter 297. Northerners. This was a very interesting regional race. Their physical characteristics were a bit like the Siberian race, with a relatively tall physique and quite exuberant hair. Most of the northern men were brave and warlike. Because of the cold climate, they needed strong alcohol to warm their blood for a long time. The way of thinking of the northerners was also slightly characteristic of a fighting nation. The women in the north had fair skin and delicate facial features. If the skin was more delicate, it was easy to become a beauty, similar to the women in the Crimea. Gloria was a typical northern beauty. And she was the most beautiful one. Therefore, in a place like the north you would often see some ridiculous things. Even the pirates here were a little brainless. Many of them were famous for their stubbornness. They were a group of people who were not easy to deal with. For example, in the pirate army that besieged Soren on Snake Island, there was a pirate warship from the north. When the others saw that the situation was not good, they all surrendered. Only they fought hard and escaped with casualties. Because of this strange temperament, the northern pirates were almost the weakest group of pirates. The reason was very simple. They were not convinced by each other. There were almost no strong pirate forces on the entire north coast. They were all scattered into small groups of northern pirates. Because the trade on the north coast was mainly concentrated in the Arendelle area, and Arendelle had a very strong navy, it was often seen that northern pirates crossed the border to make a living in other waters. Although their overall strength was relatively weak, the individual strength of the northern pirates was generally higher than that of pirates in other places. The ones who robbed Soren were relatively ordinary northern pirates. However, they had a good dragonhead warship. This was the habit of the Vrykle people in Iceland. They liked to install a dragon head on their warships, and this habit was inherited by the northern pirates to show their strength. The Vrykle people were the only pirate group capable of unifying the north coast. Unfortunately, they were quite xenophobic. Because of the belief of the war spirit totem, even the other races in the north were excluded by them. They were also the only pirate group who dared to attack Arendelle's route. No one knew why the Princess Royal did not destroy them. The sound of ghosts wailing and wolves howling came from the front. As soon as Soren saw the northern pirates' warship, one of the captains immediately ran over to ask for his orders. He looked at the northern pirates' warship in the distance and said, "Bait them." This time, Soren had brought quite a number of elites with him. These were all veterans of naval battles. After hearing Soren's orders, they immediately understood his intentions. Then, they saw the captain below laughing strangely as he ordered the others to take action. They turned the ship around and made it look like they wanted to escape but were somewhat flustered. At the same time, they deliberately slowed down a little so that the pirates in front would feel that they could catch up. As expected, the enemy soon fell into the trap. A bare-chested pirate leader with a bearded face and a wolf head tattoo on his chest stood under the mast of the dragon-headed warship and shouted to his men beside him, "Don't fire. Get closer. Their speed is not as fast as ours. Prepare for boarding battle. This time we have to take down the goods along with the ship." The spoils of war that pirates looted from merchant ships were of various grades. The most valuable items were not necessarily the goods on the ship. Sometimes the value of the merchant ship itself was higher than the goods. Therefore, when the conditions allowed, pirates preferred to board ships to defeat their enemies. This way, not only would they not destroy the valuable goods on the ship, but they could also bring the ship back with them. Soren's pirate leader used this to attract the pirates, making them feel that they could catch up. This way they would approach the ship and fight. They won the battle. Soren's ship was theirs. They lost the battle. Their ship naturally belonged to Soren. Waves of shouts and howls came closer and closer. The northern pirates in front of them were so excited that they cried like ghosts and howled like wolves. From time to time, some of them even roared like battle cries. Their faces were full of excitement because they realized that there were not many people on the ship. When both sides could see each other, the northern pirates immediately swung their ropes over. Bang! The hulls of the two ships collided slightly. About 20 northern pirates roared and rushed over. Behind them, about 30 pirates were preparing to board the ship. Clap, clap. Soren, who had been sitting by the side and watching the show, clapped his hands. Then a large group of fierce-looking pirates with scars all over their bodies rushed out of the cabin. The pirates' intuition was actually quite sharp. When the group of northern pirates swung their ropes over to Soren's ship, they immediately realized that the ship in front of them was not a merchant ship. This was because the sailors in front of them did not show any signs of fear. They did not even show any signs of nervousness. Among the many scarred sailors in front of them, there were actually some who were excitedly licking their knives. Their expressions were even more ferocious and cruel than the pirates, as if they were lambs that had sent themselves to their doorstep. Kiki. A burly pirate carrying a battle axe that weighed more than 100 pounds rushed over. He was the ship's field commander. He seemed to have a trace of some other bloodline. He was about 2 meters tall. Howling excitedly, he directly swung his battle axe and split one of the northern pirates in half. Then he roared, "Guys! Kill these idiots! You're looking for your own death. Raise the battle flag. Let these guys die a little more knowing." Suddenly, the pirates who rushed out of the cabin were extremely ferocious. With just a round of attacks, they directly knocked down the northern pirates who rushed over. Then, one of the nimble pirates went over to raise the battle flag, while the others rushed over to the opposite pirate ship. The battle was naturally not to repel the enemy's attack, but to take away their warship. A black flag was raised. There seemed to be a commotion on the opposite pirate ship. One of them seemed to recognize the flag and exclaimed, "It's the throat cutter. It's the flag of the southern pirate king." There was a commotion. The northern pirates in front of them seemed to be frightened. Then, when Soren's elite pirates rushed over, they were immediately thrown into chaos. The battle had been going on for so long. There was almost no need for Soren to do anything. The elite pirates that he brought back from the outer islands under his command only needed 2 rounds of attacks to defeat the northern pirates. Some of them even threw away their weapons and surrendered. However, this proportion was obviously much less than the southern pirates who surrendered in the battle. They were obviously weaker than Soren in terms of strength and numbers, but there were still some northern pirates who were desperately fighting. This might have something to do with their traditions. There were many traditions among the northern pirates that advocated death in battle. They believed that the souls of those who died in battle were more noble than those who died of old age or illness. And in the southern pirates' customs, they would not fight to the death if they could live. Swoosh. Soren did not join the boarding battle. His identity was now different, and sometimes there was no need to rush to the front line. However, he also needed to gain some slaughter EXP, so when the battle began he took out the Elven War Bow +2, that Dark Blade gave him. Shooting with a war bow in a naval battle was actually quite fun. Soren specifically chose to shoot the wounded enemy pirates. With his strong basic attributes as support, the probability of hitting the enemy was quite high. Not to mention he also had the lucky gold coin which gave him a permanent +1 luck bonus. Soren killed the northern pirates in front of him one by one. Although his mastery of the bow was not very good, it would not be a problem if he accidentally killed his own men. After all, he could still gain slaughter EXP. Fortunately, this did not happen. Soren harvested 7 or 8 heads one after another, and then all the northern pirates who were desperately resisting were shot dead. The battle was over. The whole process took less than 10 minutes, and the northern pirates who wanted to rob Soren were robbed instead. Soren's fleet had one more warship. Take them down and interrogate them. Soren frowned as he looked at the bloodstains on the deck. He then put away the Elven War Bow and ordered, "See if you can get anything useful out of them. Then get someone to clean up the bodies and clean up all the bloodstains on the deck. This time we are going to the North Coast City. Try not to cause any unnecessary trouble." "Yes, Your Excellency." A burly man with a battle axe that weighed more than 100 pounds bowed respectfully. Then, when he turned around and ordered the other pirates to clean up the bodies, his expression was quite fierce and arrogant. He looked a little arrogant. As the elite pirates under Soren, many of them had a strange temper. But no matter how strange their tempers were, these people were respectful in front of Soren. They would only become arrogant and domineering when facing others. There were pirates cleaning up the battlefield and collecting the spoils on the bodies. Some of them went to the opposite pirate ship. They might need to bring the ship back to Shipwreck Bay. Behind the deck was a group of captured enemies. Next to them were elite pirates who were watching over them. There was a ferocious-looking executioner who was interrogating them. From time to time, screams could be heard. After such a series of battles, the survival of the fittest among Soren's men had finally cultivated a group of elite troops that could be used in battle. About a few minutes later, the pirate in charge of interrogating ran over and whispered something in Soren's ear. Then Soren stood up in surprise and frowned. "Dragon? Are you sure he's not lying?" Standing in front of Soren was a pirate with a rather ugly face. He patted his chest and promised, "Your Excellency, with my years of experience they can't hide from me if they're lying. And there are others below who know a little bit about it. These guys came to the northwest for this matter." "Is that so?" Soren nodded slightly and showed a thoughtful expression. After a while, he looked up and glanced at the others and said in a deep voice, "Don't leak the news. Although it's just an adult white dragon, it looks like it's worth our time." Chapter 298. Slaying a Dragon. Thinking of this, Soren's expression could not help but become a little excited. For any adventurer, slaying a dragon was a very meaningful thing. Not only did it represent a dangerous challenge, but it also represented an amazing reward at the same time. Although Soren had encountered a lot of dragons during this period of time, they were basically all subspecies of dragons. This time he had the opportunity to kill a pure-blood dragon, so he would not miss it no matter what. White dragon. An adult white dragon. Although the white dragon was very weak among the pure-blooded dragon species, it was much stronger than other sub-dragon species. An adult white dragon also had the strength of a legendary level. Its frost dragon breath could freeze a person into ice in an instant. As a pure-blood dragon, the white dragon also had a natural dragon template. Their spoils of war were 3 times the standard, their vitality was stronger than most monsters, and at the same time, they also had extremely tough dragon skin and dangerous dragon claws and fangs. The basic health of an adult white dragon was more than 20 points. Under normal circumstances, their vitality was quite strong. Many people used to think that the white dragon was the weakest among the pure-blood dragons, so they looked down on it. However, when the time came, they realized that even though the white dragon was the weakest among the dragons, it was still much more dangerous than other creatures. The challenge rating of an adult white dragon was 16. If it had rare grade items and 1 or 2 legendary equipment, this challenge rating could be lowered to 12. It was difficult for ordinary weapons to break the white dragon's skin and scales, so at least a grade 1 rare grade weapon was needed to deal with it. There was a period of decline for the dragons. The specific reason was not known, but there was a period of time when the pure-blood dragons could not cast many spells. Sometimes they could not even cast as many spells as the dragon disciple sorcerers. Therefore, during that period of time, the dragons were the easiest to kill. It was roughly around the time of the Silver Age in the Arcane Empire. During this period of time, the dragon's ability declined for some reason, and their general challenge rating was lowered by about 2 to 5 levels. Then, after the Arcane Empire, the dragons became a lot stronger. Originally, the adult white dragon could only cast wind, which basically relied on its claws and fangs to attack. But now it could cast fog and ice wall. Wizards believed that this fluctuation in ability was related to the elemental tide, but the specifics were still unconfirmed. Note: adepts believe that the elementium in the world will move like the tides of the sea. This ebb and flow will affect the elementium energy structure of the world. Therefore, a species like the dragon race that relied solely on their innate abilities would easily be affected by the elemental tide and experience changes in their overall abilities. However, the time span of this change is over thousands of years. Soren wasn't too sure about the growth conditions of the dragon clan. However, based on his past experience, he knew that dragons that lived in special environments would have 1 or 2 more spells than other dragons of the same species. The information that his subordinates had interrogated was actually not very complete. Because even these pirates had only heard that an adult white dragon had flown over here, and that the white dragon seemed to be slightly injured, swaying a little when it flew. After receiving the news, they sent people to the north to inquire about the situation. Yesterday morning, they just learned that a white dragon had attacked humans near the deep-water port. This white dragon that suddenly appeared near the human town caused a lot of panic. In the end, the Chamber of Commerce was forced to pool money and hire adventurers to deal with it. At that time, it attracted a lot of adventurers from the north. However, in the end, it seemed that they didn't succeed in killing the white dragon. They only injured it a little, and more than half of the adventurers who dealt with it died. After the white dragon encountered the adventurers, it flew to the sea, and then it happened to be seen by some people. The news also spread to some people. These pirates went in the direction of the white dragon to try their luck and see if they could find its resting place. However, they didn't expect that they would unfortunately meet Soren. According to Soren's judgment, the white dragon's nest might be on an island in the middle of the sea, because dragons would not build their nests near human settlements. It must be for some reason that it appeared in a place called the Deepwater Port. However, it seemed that after being injured, the white dragon wisely chose to leave and wanted to fly back to its nest to recuperate. There were many dragon subspecies in the north. However, there weren't many pure-blooded dragons. The number of white dragons was also relatively small. They were mainly distributed in the depths of the glacial mountains and the cold islands in the sea. If its nest was near the deep-water port, it would be difficult for the dragon to abandon its nest and run away according to the dragon's habits. If its nest was in the glacial mountains, then the dragon wouldn't fly to the sea. Therefore, Soren thought that the possibility of its nest being on an island in the north coast was as high as 80%. But the problem now was, there were so many islands in the sea, where would its nest be? Tap tap tap. Soren gently tapped his fingers. After listening to the story, he slowly said, "We only know the direction it flew to, but we don't have the exact location. I'm afraid it's difficult to find its nest in the vast sea. How can this kind of thing take so much effort? Oh, they must know where the white dragon's nest is. At least they know the approximate location." Soren frowned and stood up. He said in a deep voice, "What about the leader of the northern pirates? Bring their leader here." As Soren's voice fell, the pirates around him couldn't help but look at each other. After a while, seeing Soren's frown getting deeper and deeper, one of them finally mustered up the courage to say, "Your Excellency. Their leader has been shot dead by Your Excellency." Dead. Soren was stunned for a moment, then he rubbed his forehead in annoyance. He didn't have any recollection of it at all. The leader of the northern pirates was too insignificant. Even if someone mentioned him now, Soren couldn't remember when he killed him. He was one of the targets that Soren killed. Torture them. Soren frowned and thought for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "Torture them one by one. I don't believe that they would come here to try their luck just because they saw a dragon fly by without knowing where its nest is." Time couldn't drag on for too long. The dragon race had a strong regenerative ability. If they dragged on for too long and found the white dragon, they would have to face an unharmed giant dragon. The pirates in front of him did not seem to be very strong. They dared to slay the dragon because the white dragon was injured. Therefore, they must be confident that they could find the dragon in a short time and kill it before it recovered from its injuries. Chapter 299. Screams could be heard coming from the cabin. About half an hour later, one of his men came up with a bloody nautical chart and bowed respectfully in front of Soren. "Your Excellency. Everything is out. The dragon might have gone here." The man in front of Soren spread out the nautical chart. It was a map of the south coast, found from the corpse of the northern pirate leader. He pointed at an island in the northwest and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency. It's here. I think it's called Shark Reef. They think that the dragon's lair might be nearby." Hearing this, Soren reached out and took the nautical chart. After looking at it with a frown, he asked, "How is the route? How long will it take?" The man beside him quickly ran down to ask, then came back and said, "Your Excellency. There aren't any dangerous areas on this route, but there are a lot of hidden reefs here, so we need to be careful. In terms of time with our ship, it will take at most 1 day. We should be able to reach this place by tomorrow morning." Shark Reef. Soren tapped his finger on the table, thought for a moment, then opened his eyes and said, "Tell Old Sea Eagle to come here." A minute later, a well-built middle-aged man appeared in front of Soren. Unlike the other pirates under Soren's command, Old Sea Eagle seemed to have the demeanor of a noble. It was a very special temperament, and it was different from the other pirate leaders under Soren's command. This middle-aged man was indeed a small noble, a lord of the south coast. Unfortunately, he lost his title and wealth for some reason. In the end, he became a pirate and became a somewhat famous pirate. He was a small pirate leader under Soren's command. There were many people like him under Soren's command. After all, most of the pirates in the south coast had to listen to his command. "Give this letter to the master of the wizard tower." Soren raised his head and looked at the middle-aged man in front of him. He took out a quill and quickly wrote a letter. Then he sealed it with wax and handed it to the middle-aged man. He ordered, "Send the gifts on the ship over later. I've already arranged the location and route for you. You can take the test at the estuary and head to Ice River City. After you deliver the gifts, you just have to wait there. If the master of the sorcerer tower has anything she wants to ask you, just answer her." There were valuable gifts on this ship. Soren did not plan to use this ship to challenge the white dragon. After all, it was an adult giant dragon. Giant dragons could easily overturn a ship if they went all out. Therefore, he decided to divide his troops into 2 groups. He would let his trusted subordinates deliver the gift to Gloria's wizard tower, and then he would take part of the elite troops to search for the white dragon. A pure-blooded adult dragon species should not be given up so easily, not to mention that it was injured. Soren planned to use the northern pirates' ship to find it. Even if it was damaged, he would not feel bad. The middle-aged man in front of him nodded gently, then he put away the letter and respectfully said, "Don't worry. The gifts will be delivered in perfect condition." Good. Soren looked at him with satisfaction and reminded him, "Don't trespass the wizard tower. Just send the message as I said. She should meet you after she knows the news." "Okay. You can go now." Soren had always been a strict person. After he decided to divide his troops, he immediately ordered his subordinates to set sail for the northern wizard tower. He himself went to the dragon-headed warship that captured the pirates. It was not necessarily useful to deal with a giant dragon because many people could only stare blankly when the dragon flew into the sky. Therefore he only brought the elite pirates with him. There were only about 20 of them. As for the captured pirates, they were still kept on the ship. If they could be recruited, they would be recruited. If not, they would be sent to do manual labor. Otherwise, Soren would have already harvested their heads. Soren actually had a lot of men under his command, but compared to the other two pirate kings, they were still a little lacking. If he wanted to fight the pirate king Ashrod in the future, he was afraid that he would lack stronger elite pirates. These northern pirates were basically grade 2 and above. With a little training and more experience, they would be able to become grade 3 pirates. These were the backbone of the pirates. The two warships soon separated. Soren's original ship continued to sail to deliver the gift to the northern tower, and at the same time, it brought a letter from him. As for the dragon-headed warship from the northern pirates, it went to a place called Shark Reef. That was the place where the white dragon most likely built its nest. If it was found, Soren would kill it. If not, Soren would give up and go to the north. A day passed very quickly. Because the captives who knew the route were also on the ship, Soren easily passed through the reef. Then, on the morning of the second day, an island appeared in front of him. It looked a little like the distribution of the Spratly Islands. In the vast sea there were dozens of large and small islands. The area was basically not very big, and the smallest was only a few dozen meters wide. However, at a glance, he could see that there was a larger island with a diameter of more than 30 kilometers. The whole island was independent like a cliff, and there was a dense forest on it. Because it was close to the northwest, the terrain of the island was a little strange. If he really wanted to say what it was a bit like the Ice and Fire Island in the Heaven Sword and Dragon Saber. On the north side of the island there was obviously ice and snow, and on the south side of the island there was a volcano. However, it seemed that the volcano had not erupted for a long time. He just did not know if it was an extinct volcano or an active one. This kind of terrain was very attractive to dragons. Many kinds of dragons like to build their nests in such an environment, so the possibility of the white dragon flying here was very high. Dock. Soren picked up the monocular and looked at the island in front of him, then ordered, "Dock at this better place. Let's go to the island and take a look." About an hour later, the Dragonhead warship docked at one side of the island. Soren brought some of his elite subordinates to the beach, and left 3 to 5 people on the ship to guard it. As soon as he arrived on the island, Soren felt that the situation here was a little strange. The reason was simple. There were very few animals here and the whole island was very quiet. There were not many birds in the dense forest. Under normal circumstances there should be many animals living here, and birds also like to build their nests here. However, it seemed that there was nothing here, which could only mean one thing, and that was that there was a terrifying creature nearby. The most likely was a dragon. Draconic aura was a kind of ability that could cover a large area. Even the weaker white dragon, as a pure-blooded dragon species, had draconic aura. Any creature that came close to it would have to undergo a will immunity test, or else it would be enveloped by fear. Draconic aura would expel other creatures near the dragon's nest, and other creatures would not dare to come close unless they were enslaved by the dragon. It seemed that there were no seabirds here, and it was probably because the dragon would fly by from time to time. Gulu. Some strange sounds attracted Soren's attention. Just as he raised his hand to signal the others to be careful, a sharp sword suddenly shot out from the forest and directly hit one of his subordinates. Then he saw the bushes in front of him shake, and dozens of short humanoid creatures with messy hair and oil paint rushed out. They held simple weapons in their hands, but their movements were fast and fierce. These humanoid creatures had the same outline as humans, but they were very thin and small like monkeys. They were about 1.2 to 1.4 meters tall, and their movements were very fast. Their eyes were wild and fierce, and they roared as they rushed over as if they wanted to kill all of them. "It's the barbarians." A pirate captain shouted and said in a deep voice, "Everyone be careful. These barbarians are very agile. Be careful of their weapons, they might be poisoned." Shoo. A sword appeared in Soren's palm, but then something unexpected happened. His own sword did not hit the barbarian in front of him. The barbarian's short body was able to dodge in mid-air, and when its body was in the air, there was basically no point for it to dodge Soren's attack. But that was all it could do. After Soren's attack missed, a cold light appeared in his other hand, and then the barbarian in front of him was cut in half. Sword form, waist cut. Soren put away his sword to defend, and held a curved sword in each hand to block the attack of another short barbarian. Then he jumped back 3 steps and rushed forward to perform, sword form, spinning strike. Puchi. Streams of blood splattered into the air. A series of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Target killed. You successfully activated, sword form, waist cut. You dealt 76 damage to the target, heavy hit. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You've gained 1800 slaughter EXP. Target killed. You successfully activated, spinning strike. You dealt 56 damage to the target, heavy hit. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You've gained 1560 slaughter EXP. A series of slaughter EXP notifications appeared. Soren was very surprised to find that the barbarians in front of him were probably grade 2 or above, but most of their dexterity was above 20 points. At the same time, the slaughter EXP they gave seemed to be about 50% higher than the enemies of the same grade that Soren had dealt with before. The barbarians in front of him basically had around 1500 slaughter EXP. Chapter 300. A series of screams were heard. Although a large number of the savages in front of them were killed, the pirates that Soren brought over also suffered a lot of losses. Because these savages used simple weapons in order to pursue lethality, they smeared poison on their weapons. This kind of poison weapon was more troublesome as long as it hurt people. Fortunately, these pirates were all elite troops and most of them had a decent physique. Otherwise, they would have died in the first round of the poison test. As long as they survived the test of death, even if they were poisoned, it would not be completely fatal. Because the physique of the professions in this world was generally stronger. Be careful. From time to time, there would be a cry of alarm. The savages in front of them could use blow darts, but they were not metal arrows but wooden ones that were as sharp as toothpicks. This kind of blow darts did not have an anesthetic effect but they were quite poisonous. Several of the elite pirates brought by Soren fell to the ground, but fortunately, the others were experienced in fighting and quickly blocked the attack of the savages. These savages did not have any armor, and they were wearing simple animal skins. As long as they did not dodge the attack, they would be killed in one blow. A cold light of the sword appeared. Soren saw that 3 to 5 of his men had died, and the murderous intent in his heart became stronger and stronger. He used the curved sword with both hands to activate the last haste, on a rare grade item, and then his whole body turned into a shadow and rushed into the savages. With the effect of haste, it was much easier to deal with these savages. Soren's 2 swords danced wildly and turned into a sky full of light. Blood splashed in front of his eyes and heads fell to the ground. In just a few minutes, more than 10 savages were beheaded. Gulagalahi. Strange sounds were heard. Seeing that they were no match for these people in front of them, the savages actually ran away directly. More than 20 savages that rushed in at the beginning died, and the remaining 10 or so relied on their agile hands to escape back into the forest. These savages' climbing ability was very strong. After getting into the forest, only the leaves and shrubs could be seen shaking, and then they disappeared in a moment. Soren did not let his pirates chase after them. Instead, he looked at the other wounded and ordered, "Take the wounded to the ship, the rest of you follow me to go around here." The savages were widely distributed. On the islands within the range of the sea, the figures of the indigenous people could often be seen. Soren touched the bodies of the savages in front of him and found some strange signs. Then he found a sculpture carved out of wood on one of the savages who looked like the leader. This sculpture was a bit like a totem, but it was not the beast that Soren was familiar with, but it looked like a hovering dragon. That's right. The more he looked at it, the more it looked like a dragon. Soren's face when he saw it, and he was a little bit excited. "Be careful. There should be a dragon here." Here. Of the savages were of the savages. Of the savages of course they were not enslaved by humans. Instead they were enslaved by some powerful and terrifying creatures, such as the giant dragon that set its nest here. Of soft them. Of soft them. Of the soft them. Dragons actually had strong enslavement abilities. They could enslave most of the monsters, including subspecies of dragons and those of their own kind that were weaker than them. Therefore, you should never think that you only need to face a dragon when you want to slay a dragon. In the past, many people thought that they could slay a dragon just by reading a little guide. They took for granted that dragons were the kind of creatures that would fight on the ground. As a result, when they really encountered a dragon, they were all dumbfounded. Warriors could not fly to the sky to attack, wizard spell damage was not enough, and archers could not break the dragon's scales. When the dragon swooped down and gave them a chance to attack, it often meant a fatal attack. If a falcon's dive could tear through leather armor, then how much damage could a dragon's dive do? Soren remembered this very early on. As a melee profession, he must try his best to prevent the dragon from flying to the sky to fight. Because at that time, it had the initiative. And because it could escape at any time. After all, this world still had its own rules. Even the legendary Sword Saint's explosive power on the ground was so terrifying that it may be able to kill a pure-blooded dragon in 1 or 2 rounds. However, he still couldn't use Do Chi or anything like that to fly. Most melee professions were at a disadvantage in the air, unless they increased their strength to the level of a saint. Bring the things here. Soren jumped onto a cliff, looked at the surrounding environment, and then looked at the north side of the island covered with ice and snow. Then he jumped down from above and ordered his men, "Bring all the things I prepared at the beginning." Yes. Soon his men returned to the ship. About 10 minutes later, someone ran over with a bundle of javelins. These javelins looked a bit like spears, and some of them were connected to chains. There were also heavy javelins made of steel. They looked like short javelins made of pure steel, but they were used as throwing weapons. "Take 2 each." Soren looked at the pirates behind him and ordered in a deep voice, "Leave the rest to me. When the opportunity arises, attack its wings." Dragons were very powerful. Even a white dragon was quite dangerous. The dragon scales and dragon skin on its body had very strong defensive capabilities. Even if you broke the dragon scales, you would still have to face a layer of tough dragon skin. So from ancient times to the present, in the anecdotes of bards, it seemed that the most important thing was to find a weapon that could break the dragon's defense. But in fact, only those who had really slain dragons knew that the most important thing to do was to destroy their ability to fly. There was a saying, "To shoot a man, shoot the horse. To catch bandits, capture the king." The dragon's wings were the only place on the dragon's body that was not covered by dragon scales. It was also the place with the largest area of defense and the weakest defense. Although this place was not fatal to the dragon at all. But the strategic significance of attacking this place was quite huge. It was equivalent to destroying half of the dragon's flexibility, and also making it unable to use dragon wing flaps, dive attacks, dragon wing sweeps, and so on. The protagonist in the anecdotes of bards could stupidly attack the dragon's fatal point, and then after a back-and-forth struggle, suddenly seize the opportunity to kill the dragon with more than half of its HP left. But if you played like this, you would definitely die miserably in the end. Heavy weapons were needed to deal with the dragon. The javelins that Soren brought over were quite important props. Chapter 301. There were many exotic flowers and herbs on this island. Unfortunately, Soren didn't know much about the herbology branch of alchemy, so he couldn't identify the medicinal properties of these plants. He took his men around the island from the side, and he could feel that the closer they got to the north of the island, the lower the temperature was. This was a very rare phenomenon, probably due to the geothermal heat emitted by the volcano in the south of the island. The north of the island was covered with ice and snow, but it was mainly concentrated in one area. Soren judged that it was most likely the white dragon's nest. Because there was a dragon living here, it was almost impossible to see any other beasts. Soren and his men walked for about half an hour before they finally got close to the snow-covered mountain. The surrounding cliffs were very smooth and steep, and they were also covered with a layer of ice. It didn't look like a natural situation, but more like a deliberate arrangement by some creatures. Dragons like to make their nests as steep as 90-degree mountain walls, so that other creatures that could not fly would not be able to get close to them. As for the white dragons, whose abilities were slightly weaker than the other giant dragons, they also liked to use their dragon breath to cover the vicinity of their lairs with ice. This kind of ice would make it very difficult to climb around the cliffs, and any enemy that dared to challenge it near its nest would be negatively affected by the ice walk status. They would have to do a reflex appraisal related to agility when moving, or they might slip and make mistakes in their attacks. However, white dragons didn't have such a problem because they were born with a special ability called Ice Walk. The Ice Quetzalcoatlus that Soren fought in the past had part of the white dragon's bloodline, so they also liked to cover their nests with ice. Details in Volume 1, Hide. Soren gestured to the other men behind him and said in a deep voice, "You guys stay nearby. I will find a way to lure the white dragon out of its nest, and then you guys find a chance to attack its wings with heavy javelins. Heavy weapons had a natural armor penetration ability. It could be simply understood that heavy weapons were much better than ordinary swords to deal with a knight's plate armor. These heavy javelins had a hidden armor penetration ability. It might be a little difficult to throw them out to break the dragon's scales, but it was quite easy to break the dragon's wings. There were obvious barbs on the javelins which looked similar to the barbs on a spear. Some of the javelins were even connected to a chain, while the other end was a heavy steel javelin. What kind of weapon, if used properly, could lock a dragon's wings and make it completely lose its ability to fly? Unless the dragon forcibly tore off the javelin along with the flesh of the dragon's wings. Shadow hide. Soren's figure slowly disappeared into the shadows. He scanned his surroundings and approached the mountain wall on his right. Because it was covered with a layer of ice, the entire mountain wall was very smooth. If it was anyone else, it would be impossible to climb up. However, for Soren, who had 25 points of agility, this wasn't a problem at all. A pair of daggers appeared in his hands, and he quietly climbed up the mountain. Soon he reached an open platform on the mountain wall. This was a very big platform. The diameter was probably more than 50 meters. It was difficult for nature to create such a neat platform. Soren just glanced at it and knew that it was prepared for him by the dragon. Dragons flew like eagles. They liked to swoop down from high places and soar into the sky with a flap of their wings. Therefore, many of them would prepare such a platform for themselves. Even the dragons that occupied ancient castles liked to swoop down from the highest point of the castle when they flew. This was a habit. After walking along the platform for a little distance to the left, Soren felt that something was wrong. It was an indescribable feeling. It was as if his whole body was involuntarily breathing heavily, his heart was beating faster, as if he was frightened. His back was covered with goosebumps, and there was an inexplicable sense of powerlessness and exhaustion. It felt like he had a bad cold and his whole body was weak. This was draconic aura. Almost at the same time as this feeling appeared, a row of data appeared, affected by draconic aura. Triggered test of will. Test of will passed. You have successfully avoided the negative effect of draconic aura. You have successfully avoided the fear effect of draconic aura. The feeling of powerlessness gradually subsided. It didn't last long and Soren gradually returned to normal. One of the most troublesome things to deal with when slaying a dragon was the draconic aura of a pure-blooded dragon. This was a permanent ability that didn't need to be activated. It was also a natural ability that dragons had. They could exert their draconic aura on any creature that came within a certain range of them. This kind of draconic aura ignored both friend and foe. Although it couldn't directly kill the enemy, it could create a deterrent effect. It could be said that it was quite useful to deal with creatures that were weaker and didn't have strong wills. Most of the dragons used draconic aura to open up a path for their slaves, and it was easy to subdue some monsters. Ordinary people couldn't withstand draconic aura. Therefore, using human wave tactics to deal with dragons wasn't necessarily useful. This was because the sight of a dragon would frighten many ordinary soldiers, and they wouldn't be able to fight in the end. The specific effect could be imagined as a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a group of wild elephants rushing towards you, and then you would have a long sword and a shield in your hands. In this situation, if you had the courage to stand still and fight, then your will would definitely pass. If you couldn't do this, you might fail to resist draconic aura. Will assessment 16+. Soren was a person who valued the will attribute very much, so it wasn't surprising that he was immune to the negative effects of draconic aura. However, whether the pirates he brought along could successfully resist the negative effects of draconic aura would depend on whether their will was strong enough. However, people who sailed on the sea all year round, withstood the storms and waves, and often faced the dangers of killing and fighting sea monsters would definitely have a stronger will than others. What was really important? Ever since Soren went to the abyss of hell, he deeply understood this point. From the side to the entrance of the dragon's cave, Soren quickly found his target. It was a huge adult white dragon. The depth of the dragon's cave wasn't very high. In fact, adult dragons were more impatient. They sometimes appeared a little careless, just like young people who had just reached adulthood who were easily impulsive. Only when they entered their old age would they begin to become cunning. At that time, they began to avoid direct combat and liked to use traps to deal with intruders. Their dragon's cave would gradually become a huge maze over a long period of time, and then the treasures would begin to be hidden deeper and deeper. Some dangerous monster guards would also begin to appear in the maze, such as the most common Tauren and so on. As for ancient dragons, just think of the ancient red dragon in Whiterun City. Until now, Other people thought that it was just an adult red dragon that appeared there. It was estimated that it would take a while for others to discover that there was an ancient red dragon hidden there. Then, it would cause a huge uproar in the southern plains and cause a lot of panic. At that time, it would be a big scene, but Soren didn't know if the development of the situation would be the same as what he knew in the past. If there were conditions, he would still try his luck in the future because there was a divine artifact in this ancient red dragon's cave. White dragon. The weakest of the chromatic dragons, a creature of the chaotic evil alignment. The dragon's cave in front of him was similar to the one in Soren's memory. White dragons like to dig their dragon's nest down. Although the dragon's nest was on a higher mountain, the cave's entrance was sunken downwards, and the surroundings were frozen because of its ice dragon breath. It looked like a huge ice cellar. White dragons were not picky when it came to food. Like other dragons, they could eat almost anything. The digestive ability of dragons was as brittle as steel. However, white dragons preferred to freeze their prey with their dragon breath before eating it. Many white dragons lived in overseas areas and would dive into the sea to hunt for fish. There was one more important thing. White dragons were the dragons that liked to attack from high places the most, and they would always use their dragon breath for their first attack. This was because white dragons could use their dragon breath more than other dragons. When a white dragon was in its infant stage, its scales would reflect light like a mirror. As it grew older, the luster would gradually disappear. When it reached adulthood, the characteristics of a white dragon would become grayish-white. This was an important basis to judge the strength of a white dragon. Soren only glanced into the dragon's cave and roughly judged that this was a white dragon that was in its late adult stage. It was close to its prime. Most of the dragons could be judged based on age. Their strength could be calculated based on their age. Their growth stages were Baby Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 1, Infant Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 4, Juvenile Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 7, Adolescent Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 10, Adult Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 13, Adult Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 16, Old Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 19, and Old Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 21. Basically, a white dragon would reach this stage. Further up were the ancient dragons. These dragons basically had divinity. It could be said that the difficulty of fighting them was not much different from challenging the saints. Therefore, killing ancient dragons and ancient dragons required a lot of luck. The white dragon in front of him was transitioning from its adult stage to its prime stage. This was not good news. This was because pure-blooded dragons, even the weakest white dragon among the pentashade dragons, would have an additional physical resistance and magic resistance when they transition from their adult stage to their prime stage. They would be immune to any physical damage and magic damage below 10 points. This natural talent would gradually increase over time, and in the end, it could evolve into immunity to certain types of damage. Fortunately, when these dragons were killed, their dragon scales and dragon skin would inherit part of the defensive resistance, which could be directly made into first-rate rare-grade equipment. This was a little troublesome. Soren quietly watched the adult white dragon, which was about 50 feet long in his sight, and carefully moved towards it. Chapter 302. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. Soren's footsteps were getting lighter and lighter, and his speed was getting slower and slower. Dragons had excellent hearing abilities. Even with Soren's high dexterity, it was still possible for the dragon to detect him sneaking in. Fortunately, it was a white dragon in front of him. It didn't have a high level of magic and only had some spell-like abilities. Otherwise, Soren would have to be careful of magic traps when sneaking in. Once a dragon's nest had evolved into a maze over time, there would definitely be a lot of traps. The adult dragon in front of him seemed to be sleeping, but that didn't mean it couldn't sense the outside world. Sleeping was a very important process in a dragon's life. They still retained about 50% of their basic abilities while sleeping, and could sense other creatures approaching or slightly heavier footsteps. While sleeping, the dragon's abilities would gradually increase, and at the same time, its injuries would recover at a faster rate. This required it to eat a lot of prey in advance. Soren saw that the adult white dragon was recovering from its injuries. He noticed that there was a wound on the left wing of the white dragon. The wound was about 30 centimeters long and 5 centimeters deep. It seemed to be caused by a two-handed heavy sword. This would affect the white dragon's ability to fly. Then there was another wound on the white dragon's throat. There were small, dense scales there. The seemingly weak defense was actually the toughest part of the dragon's body. It was difficult for ordinary weapons to break through. The one who attacked it must have used a long sword or a rapier. The wound was small but it was very deep. It seemed that the person who attacked it had a dragon-slaying weapon. When dealing with any pure-blooded dragon, you could imagine that most of its body was covered in full-body armor. In the anecdotes of bards, there was always a place on the dragon's body called the reverse scale. This was the dragon's fatal point. As long as you hit the reverse scale, you could kill the dragon even if it didn't hurt its heart. But in reality, dragons didn't have reverse scales. They had weak spots on their body, but they definitely didn't have a fatal reverse scale. No one knew when it started, but there was this saying in the bard's stories. Many people believed it to be true, and many naive adventurers thought that they could easily slay a dragon if they found the reverse scale. After all, the stories always said that the hero hit the dragon's fatal point and killed it instantly. Its defense must be at least 25. Soren closed the distance to about 20 meters and observed the body of the adult white dragon in front of him, mainly the color, thickness, and distribution of the scales. Based on his rich experience, Soren could tell that the adult giant dragon in front of him had a defense level of around 25 points. In other words, the dragon scales and dragon skin that covered the surface of its body could resist close to 25 points of physical damage. This defensive strength was equivalent to an adult man holding a weapon with both hands and attacking with all his strength. In other words, an adult man wielding a two-handed weapon and attacking with all his might only be able to break through the dragon's defense. It was just enough to break through his defense, and the damage was probably less than 3 points. Soren had a serious expression on his face as he sneaked closer to the other side. At the same time he thought to himself, with the elite pirates that I brought with me, it shouldn't be a problem to break through its dragon scale defense. But if it doesn't deal any heavy damage, it's estimated that the damage will be in the single digits. This was not a good thing. It was not easy to kill an adult giant dragon with just Soren's damage output alone. Following the side of the dragon's nest, Soren could see a pile of treasures. Because there were not many of them, they were directly covered by the huge body of the giant dragon. As the weakest white dragon among the chromatic dragons, although it had accumulated wealth to adulthood and had double to triple the loot standard, the treasures it had were not as exaggerated as the red dragons. Because the red dragon was the most powerful chromatic dragon, and it was also an evil giant dragon that liked to collect loot. However, in front of Soren's eyes, there were some small things that were sparkling and refracting light. Those were diamonds. The white dragon was one of the giant dragons that liked diamonds the most. As long as they found a diamond, they would always find a way to take it for themselves, unless this behavior was very dangerous. Among all the gems, the white dragon liked diamonds the most. Therefore, in almost any adult white dragon's nest, there were some eye-catching diamonds that could be found. Therefore, in the treasure that the white dragon did not seem to be rich, it was often possible to hide a valuable loot. The key was the number of diamonds. After all, this thing could be sold for a very high price as long as one piece. There was not much gold in the dragon's nest. Because it was close to the sea, Soren could hardly see much kindler. Most of it was fine gold sand and gold nuggets. There were not many gems, but there were a lot of diamonds mixed in. Soren saw nearly a dozen pieces. There was a moment of pause. Soren squatted in the corner and memorized the environment of the entire dragon's nest. At the same time, his brain began to make tactical arrangements. He had 2 plans. The first was to take advantage of the fact that the giant dragon had not discovered him and quickly pull out the legendary curved sword Icing Death to attack. As long as the distance was within 10 meters, even if the dragon's perception found him, Soren could still fight for 2 or 3 opportunities to attack. If he was lucky enough to hit the leader's vital point, Soren could cause a lot of damage to the enemy at the beginning of the battle. But in this case, the next battle would not be easy. Because the space in the dragon's nest was too narrow, the white dragon would definitely spit out dragon's breath when it reacted. At that time, Soren would have nowhere to hide. Never take the dragon's breath head-on. This was a special point in the rules of dragon slaying. The second plan was to lure the white dragon out so that there would be no chance for a sneak attack. But it could also make the white dragon think that he was a thief who sneaked into the dragon's nest. Under normal circumstances, the white dragon would definitely chase him out of the nest. In this way, Soren could lead it down and give the ambushing elite pirates a chance to attack. If he could keep the white dragon on the ground, the final victory would be as high as 80%. So, Soren made a plan in his mind. His figure suddenly flew out and rushed directly to the white dragon in front of him. Then he reached out and grabbed the treasure under it, grabbing a lot of gold and diamonds in one breath. After getting the treasure, Soren immediately retreated. Almost when he was about 5 meters away from the treasure, the sleeping giant dragon also moved slightly as if it sensed something, and then suddenly opened its huge dragon eyes. Dragon sense, 10 meters. Soren's figure had almost escaped to the outside of the dragon's nest, and only a blurry background could be seen. Roar! An angry roar sounded. The adult white dragon in front of him suddenly opened its eyes and stood up. It actually opened its mouth and said angrily in the common language, "Despicable thief." It was not an ordinary white dragon. It was not those beast-like white dragons without much wisdom. Being able to use the common language meant that there was something different about it. Chapter 303. It's been a month and a half. It seems that since he quit smoking, Fuda has been catching colds easily. He slept all day and only woke up once today. Fuda is still a little dizzy. Rumble. Heavy footsteps came from the dragon's nest. Soren didn't need to look back to know that the white dragon had woken up and was catching up from behind. Dragons had a close-range perception ability. Any creature that got close to them could be directly detected by them. Even the best halflings in the Shire could not avoid this because it was a supernatural sixth sense. The white dragon's nest was not big, which led to it rushing out quite quickly. Almost as soon as Soren's front foot ran out, the huge body of the white dragon rushed out behind him. Ice dragon breath. A cold dragon breath came out from behind Soren. Under this piercing dragon breath, the ground was frozen into ice at a speed visible to the naked eye, and soon a new layer of ice appeared in place. The white dragon's ice dragon breath was the weakest among the pure-blooded dragon species. Its lethality was only half of the red dragon breath, but it was the most used dragon breath attack. The dragon breath of an adult white dragon could freeze a man into an ice sculpture, and then with a wave of its dragon claws, the man would shatter like broken ice. The scene was quite tragic. Soren dove out of the attack range of the ice dragon breath, but there was still a little cold air on his clothes, and soon a piece of frost could be seen on his clothes. The ice dragon breath of an adult white dragon could cause about 40 points of ice damage. It was an all-shaped attack that covered a large area. This kind of ice damage was still within Soren's tolerance range. If it was the dragon breath of an adult red dragon, he was afraid that he would lose half his life just by touching it. Whoosh! There was a harsh sound of friction. After Soren rushed out of the dragon's nest, he directly jumped from a height of nearly 100 meters. However, he didn't jump down directly. No matter how high his physique was, he would still fall to his death. He relied on his weapon to reduce the force of the fall and then slid down directly, just like when he fought against the hunters on the cliff in the past. The speed of the descent was quite fast and it bought some time for Soren. So when he was about to reach the ground, the white dragon's huge body appeared at the edge of the cliff. It glanced at Soren, who had slid to the ground, and pounced on him without hesitation. Shameless thief. The white dragon in front of him seemed to have had some special experiences, because under normal circumstances, white dragons would only have relatively high intelligence when they reached old age. At the same time, they would also be able to speak languages other than Draconic. They were the closest to wild beasts among the pure-blooded dragon species. To a large extent, their challenge rating was lowered because of this. The white dragon flapped its wings and stabilized its body just as it was about to reach the ground. This dive had shortened the distance between them by quite a bit. Then it opened its mouth and spat out a dragon's breath that enveloped Soren's body. Dragons didn't have high dexterity. Most of them only had around 10 points, and because of their relatively large size, they couldn't dodge many of the enemy's attacks. However, this didn't mean that they were slow because most of the creatures with large bodies had lower dexterity. In fact, the speed of a giant dragon was comparable to that of a human with haste buff, so Soren was still within the range of its dragon's breath attack. Do it! Soren suddenly shouted and then jumped up. He reached out and grabbed a tree trunk above him, and with a 360-degree turn, he barely dodged the frost dragon's breath attack. But even so, his right hand still touched a little bit of the dragon's breath attack. In the blink of an eye, it was covered with frost and his whole arm felt a little numb. Elemental damage. Soren's legendary curved sword, Icing Death, only had an additional 3 points of cold damage, but the frost dragon's breath attack directly dealt 30 points of elemental damage per second. This was an elemental attack that could freeze blood. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. A group of fierce pirates rushed from both sides. Their eyes were filled with fear and excitement. As soon as they came out, they immediately threw the heavy javelins in their hands. The javelins flew through the air and hit the white dragon's body. Some of them hit its dragon scales, but they barely broke through the defense of the dragon scales. It was like a hammer hitting an iron felt. Most of the javelins were bounced back, but the dragon scales also showed signs of damage and traces of dragon blood seeped out. However, the javelins that hit the dragon's wings didn't bounce back. They directly penetrated the dragon's wings. Because of the barbs on them, they directly hung on the dragon's wings. Chain. When Soren landed, he shook his arm to shake off the frost that came into contact with it. Then he directly picked up a heavy javelin and threw it at the white dragon's left wing. A sharp whistling sound. In the midst of the giant dragon's angry and painful roar, Soren hit its position near the dragon's wing bone. Spread out. 2 curved swords appeared in Soren's hands. The elite pirates in front of him were 3 less. This meant that someone didn't pass the test of draconic aura. This guy didn't dare to join the battle because he didn't have enough willpower. Soren wasn't too surprised by this. It was already good enough that so many of his men could withstand the first round of draconic aura. However, everyone had the courage to face such a huge monster. In the midst of the angry roar, the white dragon rushed toward Soren. As its huge body moved, according to Soren's strategy, the other elite pirates took the opportunity to continue attacking it with their javelins. Many of his men had already discovered the wound on the dragon's wings. The white dragon in front of them was indeed injured at the beginning. This discovery made many of the elite pirates eager to try. Some even pulled out their 2-handed weapons and prepared to hack at the open wound. Idiot! Don't be impulsive. Soren awkwardly rolled away. When he saw the scene behind him, he immediately shouted, "Get out of the way!" Unfortunately, it was too late. The white dragon's attack on Soren was only half a feint. When the most cunning human in front of it dodged its dragon breath, it deliberately turned its back to those pesky insects and seemed to want to take the opportunity to sneak an attack on him. This made a cruel and bloodthirsty look appear in its eyes. As an adult white dragon with a certain amount of wisdom, it was very clear that it was better to get rid of these small fries first. Dragon tail sweep. The adult white dragon's tail was nearly 5 meters long, and the thickness was about the same as an adult's waist. Even the end of the tail was as thick as an adult's thigh. The dragon's tail was also covered with tough dragon scales. When the enemy behind it rushed over, it didn't even need to look back. Its huge dragon eyes moved, and then the thick and long dragon tail was raised high, like the fiercest and most domineering whip, lashing out. Bang! A violent impact sounded. A strong pirate closest to the adult white dragon was directly hit and flew back nearly 12 meters. At this distance, the entire tree trembled when he crashed into it. The others merely glanced at him and discovered that this pirate's ribs had completely caved in. It was as though his entire body had sunk in, as though his chest had been folded in. This was an incomparably tyrannical force that had directly broken his spine. Killed in one blow. In this case, it was basically impossible to survive. Damn it. Soren took a deep breath, and a wisp of blood appeared in his eyes. His breathing began to become heavy, and his heartbeat gradually accelerated. His body temperature rose to nearly 50 degrees, and his heartbeat directly doubled. He dared to challenge a white dragon because this kind of dragon was relatively stupid, and like a beast, it was easy to be baited. However, the white dragon in front of him was obviously smarter. It actually knew that it was better to kill the others first, and it also judged that it would be difficult to kill Soren easily. Soren couldn't let all his men die here. Otherwise, in the end he couldn't even drive the ship back. So he had to fight a tough battle with the adult white dragon in front of him. This kind of excitement of challenging a legendary creature made Soren's heart full of fighting spirit and excitement. Dragons were one of the few creatures that he studied the most. So when the white dragon in front of him turned its head to the back, and at the same time, there were obvious signs of its abdomen bulging, and its whole body showing signs of retreating, as if it was taking a deep breath, he couldn't help but shout, "Dodge! Be careful of the dragon breath." Whoosh! A gust of wind blew. The bone-chilling dragon breath was sprayed out in a large area, covering an area of nearly 15 meters. In this all-shaped dragon breath, 2 elite pirates were enveloped in it. Then they saw that their bodies were frozen at a speed visible to the naked eye. This kind of cold was even more shocking than being directly exposed to the North Pole. It was almost as if their flesh and blood were frozen in just a second or two. Finally, their whole body was like an ice sculpture, completely wrapped in a layer of about 3 centimeters of ice. Boom! The thick and long dragon tail swept over with a whistling sound. The 2 elite pirates in front of it were like broken glass and porcelain, and directly shattered into pieces of flesh. There was not a drop of blood spilled because the blood had been turned into ice. In the blink of an eye, 3 of their companions died in the hands of the white dragon. The other pirates obviously showed a trace of fear, and nearly half of them took a few steps back, because they found that the dragon was more difficult to deal with than they thought. Most of the people present were not very sure that they could withstand its attack. After all, this was a behemoth of more than 10 meters long and nearly 20 tons in weight. The height of a human was only 1.78 meters and the weight was only about 200 pounds. This kind of difference in size. A casual blow was a crushing and fatal attack. However, at this moment, accompanied by the sound of clang, Soren wielded 2 curved swords at the same time from the sky, like a cheetah pouncing on the back of the white dragon. Sword form, spinning strike. Chapter 304. Roar. A dull roar sounded as if it was in great pain. The adult white dragon's huge body could not help but tremble. Then it retracted its tail and swept towards Soren, who was on its back. Hot blood spilled out. Soren's 2 swords slashed on the white dragon's wing bone, almost creating a wound of more than 20 centimeters long. Traces of bones could be seen faintly. Even if the white dragon spat out ice dragon breath, its blood was already boiling hot. The temperature of the blood was close to 50 or 60 degrees, and it felt a little hot when it fell on the skin. The dragon's blood had a certain burning effect. The dragon's tail came with a whistling wind. Soren did not look back at all. He reached out and supported himself on the white dragon's back by listening to the wind. Then he turned and slid sideways to avoid the dragon's tail. The dragon's huge body provided him with enough attacking positions, and it also made it easier for him to dodge the enemy's attacks. In the eyes of many top rogues, it was safer to be within the dragon's body than to face it directly. Clang, clang. 7 or 8 swords appeared in a row, and Soren slashed the white dragon's body one after another. It seemed that blood was splashing out, but the data that appeared in Soren's experience told him that this injury was not fatal because he only broke the white dragon's flesh layer. The swords did not even hurt the internal organs. It was difficult to kill an adult dragon in a short time with just a little bleeding damage. Activated sword form, heavy slash. Armor break attribute triggered. You've dealt 12 plus 3 slash damage to the target. Activated sword form, horizontal slash. Armor break attribute triggered. You've dealt 6 plus 3 slash damage to the target. Soren's seemingly fierce attack actually caused quite limited damage because the dragon's scales were too strong. It almost offset most of Soren's damage. Unless he could hit the same spot continuously, which meant that after he broke the white dragon's scales, he could hit the same spot again. This way he could cause more damage. But for Soren, who still had to dodge the white dragon's attack, this requirement was too high. The white dragon in front of him was finally angry and fed up with Soren, who was jumping up and down on its back. It gave up the majesty of the dragon and rolled over like a lazy donkey, trying to crush Soren directly under its huge body. However, this was obviously not going to work. Soren dodged the attack while the dragon's body was rolling to the side. Following that, he slashed at the white dragon's abdomen. The sound of metal scraping against metal could be heard, and sparks flew everywhere. Soren didn't even have the strength to break through the dragon's scales. Dragon scales were a metallic substance. All pure-blooded dragons had the habit of devouring metal ores, so most of their dragon scales were made of metal. Dragon scales were not like the scales of snakes and lizards, which had a structure similar to a cuticle. Therefore, Soren felt as if he was slashing at an extremely sturdy armor. Especially when the giant dragon swelled up, its incomparably strong muscles made it impossible for him to penetrate the dragon's scales and injure its vital areas. Dragon wing strike. A gust of wind blew. Soren dodged the attack by a hair's breadth, but he was still hit a little by the attack. After the white dragon forced Soren down with a roll, it immediately flapped its wings and slapped at him. The javelins that it threw at the beginning were starting to show their effect. When the giant dragon launched its attack, it directly tore a hole more than half a meter wide on the dragon's wings. Large amounts of blood gushed out. The damage caused by its own attack was even higher than when Soren first slashed it. At the very least, the dragon's wings on both sides were almost torn apart. Bang! Half of Soren's body was hit by the dragon's wings, and he was sent flying. The strong wind caused him to roll continuously. He gritted his teeth and swallowed the blood that had already reached his throat. Then he stabbed his curved sword into the ground and curled up his body. The dragon wing strike was a very powerful attack. If one's body wasn't strong enough, they could be knocked unconscious. Soren didn't know if he was lucky or had good reflexes, but he barely dodged half of the attack, so his injury wasn't very serious. 1, 2, 3. Soren silently calculated the time. When the wind suddenly stopped, he suddenly got down on all fours like a 100-meter sprinter and pounced ferociously like a cheetah. This time his explosive speed was quite amazing. It was almost as if he relied on the strength of his transformation to leap into the air. The smaller the size of the creature, the more amazing the jumping effect. Therefore, although the giant dragon's strength was quite amazing, its huge body didn't have much jumping ability. Sword form, beheading. Finally, Soren found the weakness of the white dragon after it launched the dragon wing strike. His eyes were bloodshot, and he directly slashed at the dragon's long and narrow neck. After a person launched an attack, there would be a short period of paralysis. The same was true for the giant dragon in front of him. It would take a deep breath before it launched the dragon breath, and there would be another deep breath after the dragon breath. As for the more lethal dragon wing strike, it was even more so. Soren had been waiting for an opportunity because most of the giant dragons would be paralyzed for about a second after the dragon wing strike. It was just like when you threw a punch forward with all your strength, it wasn't so easy to suddenly take back the strength. 1 second. For Soren now it was enough. Clang. Soren's vigorous figure almost turned 360 degrees in the air, and directly slashed at the white dragon's neck with both hands. This time, the full-force attack finally broke through the dragon's scales. The force that was enough to cut through iron felt cut into the dragon's neck and then stuck at the neck bone. Soren never thought that he could cut off the dragon's head with one strike, unless he was a legendary berserk barbarian, so he immediately stepped back after hitting the white dragon's neck. Brr. A shrill cry was heard. The white dragon's thick neck swung violently, and directly used the dragon horn on its head to hit Soren's abdomen. Along with a muffled sound, a large amount of blood gushed out. The white dragon's ferocious strength had directly pierced through Soren's abdomen with its dragon horn. Not only was blood gushing out, even the intestines inside could be faintly seen. A ruthless row of data appeared: activated sword form, beheading. Beheading failed. You've dealt a heavy blow to the target. Target received 76 damage. Target has entered a bleeding state. Pierced by dragon horn. You've received 69 damage. You've entered a heavily injured state. You've entered a bleeding state. Plop. Soren's figure landed on the ground. He finally couldn't hold back the blood and directly spat it out. He couldn't stop himself from coughing. If he remembered correctly, the strength attribute of an adult white dragon should be around 27 points. This terrifying strength was even more terrifying than many giants. Any casual attack could cause a terrible damage to the enemy. However, the injuries on the white dragon's body were not much better. Soren's attack hit its blood vessels, and it also entered a bleeding state. If it was just the two of them, the chances of the white dragon winning in the end would be higher. However, Soren was not the only one present. How could one fight a dragon alone? Without absolute confidence, not many people would do this. Soren struggled to stand up. A faint light of magic appeared in his hand, and then he saw a portal connecting to the earth elemental plane. Then an earth elemental appeared in front of him. As Soren slashed the neck of the white dragon, the other pirates regained a lot of courage. He took a step back and said in a deep voice, "Attack it from all sides, it's about to die." In fact, the adult white dragon in front of them still had more than half of its HP, and its combat power was still very strong. However, Soren needed to give his men courage and confidence, so he had to give them the illusion that the dragon was about to die. Only in this way could they continue to fight, because pirates were the profession that liked to take advantage of the situation. Fighting against the wind would not allow them to burst out with their strongest combat power. A bottle of healing potion was poured into his mouth. Soren pressed the wound on his abdomen with his hand and simply bandaged it. In fact, he used the bandage to quickly strangle the wound, and stop the bleeding in the simplest and most violent way. It looked like the injury was shocking. However, Soren's combat power did not decrease too much, because he now had a physique beyond that of mortals. Compared to the time when he was stabbed in the heart in Port Tylon, this injury was not worth mentioning at all. Swoosh! A round of javelins was thrown. Some brave pirates attacked the white dragon from all sides, although 2 more people died in just a minute. However, they could obviously find that the dragon's reaction speed was not so fast. Soren hit its neck bone, which made it difficult for it to turn its head. Its huge body made it difficult for it to avoid attacks. The almost cracked dragon wings on its back also affected its movements. Unless someone helped it pull off all the barbed javelins on its wings, it would not be able to move easily. Vampiric touch. Just when the adult white dragon in front of him took a deep breath and was about to launch the dragon's breath again, Soren suddenly rushed up and gently tapped his finger on it. A light of divinity emerged. The white dragon's body stiffened for about half a second, and the dragon's breath also stopped for a moment. Then a pure life force rushed into Soren's body. As a special spell produced by weak divinity, Vampiric Touch should be the most difficult ability for Soren to successfully resist. This was like a killing move that directly took away 60 points of the adult white dragon's life force, and then transferred it to Soren's body. His injury recovered rapidly. However, the white dragon's injury had been dragged into a state of serious injury. Soren retained nearly 90% of his combat power, but the white dragon's life force was still reduced by nearly half, and 1/3 of the pirates who were responsible for harassment around them died. The balance of the battle had begun to tilt towards Soren's side. Chapter 305. A series of roars echoed in the air. The white dragon's angry roar could not hide the fact that more and more wounds were appearing on its body. Although the seemingly tall earth elemental was very small in front of it, this sturdy elemental was still able to withstand 3 of its attacks. With just these 3 opportunities to resist the dragon's claws, Soren left 3 more wounds on the white dragon's abdomen, back and back. At the same time, the nearby elite pirates also seized the opportunity to strike it several times. These pirates were all level 5 and above. Although they could not directly challenge the dragon, they could still attack and harass it. Dragon Tail Sweep. The thick and long dragon tail swept over like a whip. Soren rolled to avoid it, and the strong wind blew past his cheek. Although he avoided the attack, the tall earth elemental was not so lucky. In the end, it was broken into pieces. Even if it was a grade 4 elemental, it could only withstand 3 or 4 attacks from the white dragon. Fortunately, the white dragon in front of him was getting slower and weaker. Soren's continuous attacks had already dragged it into a state of serious injury. The pirates under Soren's command suffered heavy casualties. Although he was only seriously injured in the abdomen, nearly half of his men were killed. Even Soren's constitution could not withstand a few attacks from the adult white dragon. Any one of them would either die or be seriously injured. Fog. With more and more wounds on its body, the adult white dragon's eyes finally showed a trace of fear because it realized that it might die in the hands of these puny humans. It wanted to fly away, but its dragon wings were broken. The heavy javelin hooked on them, and every time it moved its wings, it could feel a stinging pain. A dense fog appeared on the battlefield. Soren was very alert and took a few steps back, while carefully watching the enemy in front of him. The adult white dragon had the ability to cast spells. The fog covered a large area. This fog was like a foggy weather in winter. It almost covered a radius of hundreds of meters, and it was difficult to see clearly beyond 5 meters. There was a scream. It was the voice of one of Soren's men. After the scream, there was the sound of bones being broken. What's going on? Soren frowned as he stared at the white dragon in front of him. Are there other monsters nearby? What other helpers does it have? Suddenly, Soren sensed that something was amiss. He immediately dashed towards the white dragon that was shrouded in mist. Soren's scimitar slashed towards the white dragon's head, but it didn't feel like it was cutting through flesh. It felt like he was slashing at air. Illusion. Soren immediately felt that something was wrong. He immediately rushed towards the source of the screams. It wanted to run away. Soren saw his subordinates being bitten into 2 halves. At the same time, he also saw the white dragon trying to escape from the fog. He didn't know what spell it used, but it was able to erase the sound of its movement. It seemed to be an area of effect silence spell. The white dragon fled in the direction that Soren had come from. However, Soren had come from the side, while the white dragon seemed to have fled from the front. That was where the group of aborigines appeared. Not good. Soren's heart skipped a beat. He immediately cast the level 1 spell, Instant Slither, on himself. This was a weakened version of Haste. Soren's time to learn spells was still too short, so he could only start with low-grade spells. Learning high-level spells was too time-consuming. Instant Slither lasted for less than a minute, but it was enough for Soren to catch up with the adult white dragon in front of him. It seemed that it really had something to do with the aborigines. Shadow Strike. Sword form, horizontal slash. Soren's figure flew out and slashed the abdomen of the white dragon in front of him with his scimitar. With a splash of dragon blood, its huge body shook slightly. Its injuries had begun to affect its movements. Even the dragon's physique was gradually declining after severe bleeding and injury. Now it was close to death, so it wanted to escape. Soren couldn't let it escape. He used nearly half of his subordinates to seriously injure it to the point of death. How could he let it escape like this? These injuries were piled up with the lives of his subordinates. If the white dragon escaped like this, Soren would not only lose his prestige, but also let down his subordinates who fought to the death. Slaying the dragon must not be stopped halfway. Otherwise, if the dragon was given time to breathe, its injuries would quickly recover. It seemed that there was really a gathering place of the aborigines in front, because Soren heard a summoning dragon roar, and then saw a commotion in the distance. It was trying to summon the aborigines. The edge of life and death had made it give up the pride of the dragon race. The white dragon was summoning the despicable aborigines who served it to help it fight. Evade sight. Shadow jump. Soren obviously felt that something was wrong. His figure disappeared in an instant, and then the shadow under a big tree in front of him twisted. Within a range of 100 meters, as long as Soren had enough control, he could appear in any shadow. The position where Soren appeared was just in front of the white dragon. His eyes were full of dense blood vessels. The moment his figure came out of the shadow, he immediately jumped up and swung his sword at the white dragon's head. Sword form, beheading. Soren's figure fell from the sky, and his curved sword slashed at the white dragon's neck, which happened to be the place where it first slashed. This time the beheading attack was powerful. It almost slammed the white dragon's head down, but it didn't cut off the white dragon's head. Instead, it let out a cry and its huge body fell to the ground. The curved sword slashed into the neck bone. Although it didn't cut off the white dragon's head, it cut the bone in half. Soren caused nearly 100 points of heavy damage, and directly pushed it to the edge of death. Sword form, beheading. There was a rustling sound in the distance. It seemed that there were indigenous people approaching. Soren didn't think much at all. After taking a breath, he once again swung his sword at the white dragon's head. A stream of blood gushed out. Soren finally cut off the white dragon's head with the third sword form, beheading. The white dragon in front of him finally died completely. At the same time, a large amount of blood gushed out and sprinkled on Soren's body, making him feel a burning pain. But he didn't leave. Instead, he let the dragon's blood cover his whole body. It was as if his whole body was soaked in the dragon's blood. This was a special baptism ritual, and it was possible to gain additional power. But it had to be effective when the dragon was just killed. Among them, there was a kind of people who would have their ability improved called dragon's descendants, which was the dragon disciple and the half-dragon. This process was like Vivian absorbing divinity, but in this case she absorbed the special power of the dragon. Others who had undergone the dragon's blood baptism might also receive additional enhancements in their abilities. For example, the dragon's blood could make the part of their body as hard as iron, innate defense +1, or the dragon's blood could strengthen their physique +1, and other possible baptism effects. This process required a certain amount of luck. The hot blood covered Soren's body. Some of the burning sensation didn't make him step back. The dragon's blood would only be so hot when the dragon had just died. It wouldn't take long for the dragon's blood to gradually cool down or even solidify. And in order to give people additional power and possibly inherit part of the dragon's power, it must be this kind of hot dragon's blood. The dragon's blood dyed Soren's whole body red. The rustling sound in the distance was getting closer and closer, and then the figures of the natives appeared a few hundred meters away. They saw Soren in the distance and also saw the dead white dragon. Then they let out a strange cry of horror and fled into the distance like a swarm of bees. A faint glimmer of divinity appeared. As the adult white dragon's body stopped twitching, a little bit of divine light invisible to the naked eye appeared and fell on Soren's body. A row of data appeared. Activated sword form, beheading. You've dealt 56 points of critical damage to the target. Beheading successful. You've successfully killed the adult white dragon. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've received 56,000 slaughter EXP. The target is a divine creature. Extracting the target's divine power. Extraction successful. You've received 1 point of divinity. Little by little, divinity fell on Soren's body. Just when he was very surprised that the adult white dragon in front of him actually had 1 point of divinity, the lucky gold coin on his body also emitted a faint light, and then he saw that the dragon's blood that covered his body seemed to have a trace of heat flowing into his body. It was some kind of invisible power that gradually penetrated into Soren's body, allowing him to inherit part of the pure blood dragon's power. Another row of data appeared. You've received the dragon's blood baptism ceremony. You've received part of the dragon's power. You've inherited part of the dragon's power. Baptism successful. You've received an additional background ability, Dragon's Blood Baptism LV1. Dragon's Blood Baptism LV1, special ability. You've successfully killed an adult white dragon. After completing this dragon slaying feat, you've received the first dragon's blood baptism. This baptism has strengthened your body and allowed you to inherit part of the dragon's power. The dragon's blood has made you stronger and also made your skin tougher. You've permanently received 1 point of natural armor and an additional 1 point of toughness. This ability can be gradually improved with the number of dragon's blood baptism. Natural armor +1, toughness +1. Note: the dragon's blood baptism can be performed at the same time as the blood purification ceremony. Chapter 306. Drops of dragon blood slid down Soren's cheeks. He now looked like he was covered in blood. The warm dragon blood gradually cooled down after coming into contact with his body, but traces of heat seeped into his skin and then gradually flowed into his body through his blood vessels. Soren felt an inexplicable sense of uneasiness all over his body. This feeling was both familiar and strange to him. It was a feeling that was difficult to describe with words, but many people had experienced it before. When one's mouth was dry and one's heart was in a mess, one would have a desire for the opposite sex. Dragon blood had the effect of stimulating sexual desire. Or it should be said that the flesh and blood of dragons generally had aphrodisiac effects. This was also the reason why many nobles in the continent were very keen on the flesh and blood of pure-blooded dragons, especially the penis. Some were even willing to pay tens of thousands of kindler to buy it. The flesh and blood of most dragons, including some subdragons, had a strong aphrodisiac effect. The specific reason was not clear, but it might have something to do with the dragon's lust, because many subdragons appeared because of this. Note: there are hundreds of subdragons, including half-dragons and so on. However, it seemed that the only thing that could make the dragons wilt in this aspect was the drows of the Underdark. For many dragons, falling into the hands of the drows was definitely a nightmare. As for the reason, those who knew would smile slightly. This familiar yet unfamiliar heat made Soren's mouth dry up. It was as if he had lost control of his body, and his blood vessels were surging. This was a feeling that Soren hated because he had always been a very rational and calm person, and at the same time he had great control of his body. But now he felt like he had been fed an aphrodisiac. He could suppress it with his will, but his body was reacting instinctively, so he had to use his will to suppress this restlessness. A scorching heat spread through his body, and after flowing through Soren's body, it finally rushed to his heart. Thump thump thump. The sound of a strong heartbeat could be heard. Soren's heartbeat gradually accelerated. It was not as fast as when he transformed into a slaughterer, but slowly increased little by little. The strong heartbeat was like a heavy drum, sending blood to every part of his body. It even made him feel as if his blood was rushing to his head, stimulating the secretion of adrenaline. This state lasted for about 3 minutes, and Soren's body gradually cooled down. His body temperature returned from 40 degrees Celsius to a normal human's temperature, and the heat also slowly subsided. Desire can affect you. But as long as you can control it, you can eventually control it. Soren finally recovered completely. The restlessness in all aspects subsided, and his body quieted down. At this moment, the sound of the pirates rushing over could be heard from behind. When they saw the decapitated dragon on the ground, they couldn't help but smile excitedly, and then they cheered loudly. They looked at Soren with eyes full of awe and worship. The slightly thin figure in front of them stood under the huge dragon's corpse, his whole body dripping with blood like a demon god, and even made them want to worship him like a god. But this feeling only lasted for a short time, and when they turned their eyes to the dragon's nest, their eyes were immediately filled with greed and desire. Pirates were always a greedy bunch. Slaying a dragon. This was not only an honor but also an incomparably rich reward. Soren turned around and looked at the elite pirates behind him. He slightly frowned and said in a deep voice, Sea Dog, go back and call the people on the ship over. Fat Fish, you take half of the people and stay here to guard. Don't touch the dragon's corpse, we'll deal with it later. The rest of you follow me back to the dragon's nest. This time, everyone will be rewarded handsomely. A gust of cold wind blew past. The dragon's blood on Soren's body had dried up, and the feeling was very uncomfortable. It was as if a person's whole body was covered in scabs after bleeding. Soren raised his hand and brushed his body to get rid of the dried blood. After the scabs peeled off from his arm, his white skin was exposed. It was as if he had received a restoration spell, and the small wounds on Soren's skin had mostly disappeared. The dragon's blood baptism strengthened the toughness of Soren's skin, and this change was equivalent to a restoration of his skin. The group of people moved towards the dragon's nest, and at this time, Soren had the time to look at the other data displayed. Dragon slaying successful. You've successfully slain an adult dragon. You've received part of the information of the epic background ability, Dragon Slayer LVL1. Dragon slaying successful. You've successfully slain an adult dragon. The pirates under your command have received additional willpower in the process of challenging the dragon. All survivors have permanently increased willpower by 1 point. All survivors have permanently increased morale by 1 point. The effect is equivalent to the first circle divine spell, boosting spirit. Dragon slaying battle, White Dragon, legendary battle. New Moon Year 1676, early January. When you went to the north to invite the witches to the outer islands, you were attacked by northern pirates. You easily defeated these enemies and at the same time captured a large number of captives. In the process of interrogating the captives, you accidentally learned about an injured white dragon. In the end, you led your men to search for the traces of the white dragon, and killed the adult white dragon on an unknown island. With your return, the pirates under your command will spread this story to even further places. Legend level +3, an adult white dragon with divinity. During the process of returning to the dragon's nest, Soren's mind was constantly thinking about this question. That was, why did the adult white dragon he killed have divinity? It didn't seem like it had a noble bloodline. There were only a few pure-blooded dragons that were born with divinity. For example, the offspring of a 5-headed dragon that guarded the front line of the Abyss Bloody War. But the offspring of that kind of existence was probably not weaker than the son of Dagon, so the possibility of the adult white dragon inheriting divinity was quite low. If it wasn't inherited divinity, then it meant that the source of its divinity was more special. The most likely reason was, it was the same as the spirits in the outer islands, and it had a trace of divinity because of the native barbarians' worship. This possibility was quite high, but what Soren couldn't understand was that spirits were half-energy life forms, and dragons were flesh and blood life forms. In his past memory, it seemed that there were very few dragons that obtained divinity in this way. Even many legendary professions couldn't rely on this method to obtain divinity. There seemed to be something hidden in this. Unfortunately, Soren was not qualified to decipher the domain of the gods, so naturally, he couldn't understand the way divinity was condensed. But he could vaguely guess something. He just didn't know if it was right or wrong. But Soren remembered the abnormalities of the adult white dragon that he encountered today. He felt that this information would be very useful to him in the future. Native people. What was the difference between them and the population on the mainland? Why was it so difficult for the population on the mainland to provide a source of divinity for certain existences, but the native people in the outer islands could continuously provide spirits with divinity? What was the reason for this? There seemed to be a fog in front of Soren's eyes, but he couldn't see through this fog. After killing the adult white dragon, a large number of data appeared. Soren's basic skills had increased by nearly 15 points, especially the roll skill which increased the most. Soren didn't feel surprised that he got 3 legendary points because dragon slaying was one of the fastest ways to gain legendary points, and this was because he killed a dragon in the outer islands. If he killed a dragon on the mainland, he would probably get around 5 points. As for the Dragon Slayer LVL1 ability, Soren still had some understanding of it. It was an epic level ability. It was a very simple ability. Dragon Slayer LV1 Epic Specialty. Background: this is a special background specialty obtained after becoming an epic legend. Your existence will become similar to an astral traveler, a dimensional explorer, and a space pioneer which others will look up to. However, this kind of background ability is more often obtained by some epic melee professions, and not those powerful spellcasters. This kind of background ability has incredible power, but it requires some special conditions to complete it. Current progress: killed an adult white dragon, achieved; killed an adult black dragon, not achieved; killed an adult green dragon, not achieved; killed an adult blue dragon, not achieved; killed an adult red dragon, not achieved. Note: after killing the evil faction's pentashade dragon, the second stage of the epic ability advancement will be unlocked. It was a very difficult epic ability. Even Soren couldn't complete it when he was at his peak, because slaying a dragon required not only strength but also luck. If you wanted to meet a dragon, you had to be able to defeat it. It was easier to find a dragon now, but when the Age of Chaos began, even giant dragons would learn to hide with their tails between their legs. At that time, it would be more difficult to find a giant dragon. However, if you wanted to find a god who had transformed into a saint, it would be very easy. Unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to defeat them. Those who dared to transform into a saint were basically gods who were close to the power of a great god. Some of them were at the level of the main gods. Soren could guess a little about this epic ability, but he wasn't completely sure. This was because any epic ability, even if it was a background ability, was quite difficult. It could be said that the difficulty of this ability was much more difficult than the Death Walker that Soren was currently working on. He could only wait and see if there was a chance in the future to find all the pentashade dragons of the evil faction. Chapter 307. The cliff of the Dragon Cliff was a little difficult to climb. Soren had no choice but to go up first and throw down a rope. Soon, the elite pirates climbed up the ice cliff and looked at the dragon's lair with eager eyes. Soren counted the number of people and then led them into the dragon's lair. What appeared in front of them was a pile of shining gold treasures. Although it wasn't as exaggerated as the entire dragon's lair, it was still visually stunning, especially the scattered gold sand and gold nuggets. So much gold. A one-eyed pirate with an eye patch looked at it and couldn't help but gulp and said, "So much gold, so many gems. I'm afraid this is enough for us to do dozens of jobs, right?" The other pirates had similar expressions. However, some of the leaders looked calmer, but they still felt a little dazzled. Only a young man was calmer. He took out a monocle from his shirt pocket and looked up and down. Then he murmured as if he was calculating, "The gold and silver should be around 100,000 kindler, and the gems and diamonds should be around 50,000 kindler. I'm not sure about the other things, but we should have made a lot of money this time. Our brothers didn't die in vain." It took more than 200 years for a white dragon to reach adulthood. So the wealth in front of them was the treasure it had accumulated over 200 years. Because it had never attacked a city or kingdom, the number of treasures didn't seem too shocking. If it was a dragon that had attacked a city or extorted a kingdom, the treasure it had might be a bit like the dragon in The Lord of the Rings. That would be a real mountain of gold and a sea of silver. Maybe it was because of his experience, Soren was a lot calmer when he saw such a mountain of gold in front of him. He glanced at the treasure in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Move it all to the ship. You should remember my rules. When the time comes, you will be rewarded according to your contributions. If anyone dares to hide it, I don't need to tell you what will happen. Come, the three of you move the gold out first. One-eyed pirate, the five of you divide the silver into a pile and carry it down with a cloth. Later, when someone comes with a box, use the box to carry it all back. This time, everyone will be greatly rewarded." Soren quickly finished his work. Then he let the young pirate with single-rimmed glasses come over, and the two of them separately sorted the jewels and diamonds. These were all valuable spoils of war. Even if Soren strictly forbade people from keeping them, there was a chance that someone would sneak in a few pieces. So it was better for him to deal with them himself. There were more ordinary gems such as rubies, sapphires, agates, jadites, and so on. There were about 100 of them. The value of these gems was relatively low, probably because this world was rich in minerals. Most of these gems were worth between 100 kindler and 500 kindler. Finally, there were about 50 diamonds that the white dragon liked to collect. These diamonds were all very valuable. Soren glanced at them and found that they were all worth more than a few hundred kindler. There was one diamond that was almost the size of a fingernail. It was a crystal clear blue diamond that seemed to have been polished. Soren held the beautiful blue diamond in his hand and estimated that it weighed about 50 grams. If this weight was in his previous world, it would probably be a rare treasure. Even in this world, it was a very rare thing. Only the top nobles of the royal family could have it. Looks like it's worth a lot. Soren played with the blue diamond in his hand. The craftsmanship on it was very high, and he didn't know where the white dragon got it. Because Soren didn't have the ability to appraise it, he couldn't determine its value. But he was sure that it was more expensive than all the other diamonds added together. Because of its high value, it wasn't easy to sell it. Even if the royal family wanted to buy it, they would have to consider their financial resources. Conservatively speaking, its value should be more than 30,000 Kindler. Soren glanced at it and put it away. After that, he put away the rest of the jewels and diamonds. Then he looked around for extraordinary equipment as his spoils of war. Unfortunately, Soren didn't find anything. Because this was an overseas area, the dragons that lived here rarely encountered adventurers. Naturally, it was difficult to collect rare equipment of high value. These days, the more frequently a dragon was challenged, the more valuable its loot would be. For example, the white dragon, which was killed by Soren in an instant, didn't have many rare equipment. Among the 5 dragon species, the red dragon was the strongest and had the most treasures. Basically, there were legendary equipment in the dragon nest. This was something that other dragon species couldn't compare to. About half an hour later, Soren emptied the dragon nest. The pirates who stayed on the ship had already arrived. The next thing he needed to do was to transport the corpse of the white dragon. But when he was about to go out, the young pirate next to him seemed to have found something. He came over with 2 gray stones in his hand and said respectfully, "Your Excellency, I found this in the corner but I don't know what it is. But it seems to be something useful." "What is this?" Soren reached out and took the 2 gray stones. He glanced at them and couldn't help but tremble. He then looked at the young pirate next to him and praised, "Well done. What's your name?" The young pirate looked a little excited. He bowed and said, "My name is Narcos. They like to call me treasure-seeking mouse." Treasure-seeking talent? Soren was stunned for a moment. He then looked at him from head to toe and said, "Yes. I'll remember you. Someone will arrange for you when we go back." There were some strange talents in this world. Many of these abilities were innate, just like some people who were born with an unexpected intuition for treasure-seeking. There were also some people who had extraordinary talent in searching, eavesdropping, and perception. These people were born with 1 or 2 talents. Many of them were not combat abilities, but if they were not used properly they would be very useful. Soren remembered that there was a goblin who was quite amazing. He was born with a legendary talent for treasure-seeking. It seemed that there was nothing valuable that could be hidden from him. Soren left the dragon cliff with his men. On the way he kept playing with the 2 gray stones in his hand. He was more familiar with these things, but he still needed to use some slaughter EXP to identify them. Then a faint light appeared. Item type, Soul Stone, +1 item grade. Rare, grade 1. Item description, this is a special stone that stores soul energy. It is a defective product of soul trapping or other soul binding spells. The soul energy stored in this kind of soul stone is limited. It can be used as a substitute for many special materials, or as an equivalent alchemy tool. In the Bator Inferno and the Bottomless Abyss, soul stones are often used as a currency for transactions. This is because gold, silver, and jewelry do not have much meaning to the demons. Only souls are what they desire the most. Requirements, none. Effect 1. Extract energy from the soul stone. Receive 3,000 to 5,000 slaughter. Express effect 2. Use it as a currency for transactions with demons, or as a substitute for summoning contracts. 2 soul stones. Both were grade 1 rare items. Soren did not know where the white dragon got it. From what he knew, soul stones were very rare in the material plane. They were only used as currency in the Bator Inferno and the Bottomless Abyss. Gold, silver, and jewelry did not have much meaning to demons, and demons, especially to demons. Gold was just a boring collection and silver was something that they hated. Silver was called poison stinger in the Bator Inferno. Demons would be burned when they touched it, just like humans touching sulfuric acid. The thing that demons desired the most was souls. That was why the souls of the Bator Inferno were the most valuable currency. However, this kind of currency was quite rare because they had to find a way to steal it from the hands of the Grim Reaper. A complete soul was quite valuable. Unfortunately, there were many demons in the Bator Inferno that were not strong enough, so the soul stone was used as a substitute. This was an incomplete soul energy. It was once jokingly called the demon's currency. It could be used to trade with demons or as a sacrifice to summon demons. If it was someone like Soren who could absorb soul energy and convert it into slaughter EXP, he could also directly absorb the energy from the soul stone to increase his strength. That was why many people liked to collect soul stones in the past, because it could allow a person to quickly make a comeback. there was energy in the soul stone. However, low-grade demons could not absorb it. It was more often offered to middle-grade demons and above. Then, the higher-grade demons would bestow energy to raise the strength of their subordinates by 1 or 2 grades. Therefore, even in the Bator Inferno, the soul stone was a rare item. Basically, only middle-grade demons could collect it. Their strength was about the same as legendary professions in the material plane, although it was only a grade 1 rare item. However, the rarity and value of the soul stone was similar to that of legendary items, and its circulation was basically limited to the Bator Inferno. Souls are the currency. This was the most common language in hell. The most wasteful way to use the soul stone was to directly absorb its energy. Although Soren did not know how to use the soul stone, he also knew a way to maximize its value. That was to use the soul stone to summon a demon, and then invite a group of happy friends to come and watch it in advance. As for whether he would kill the demon or use it for something else, that would depend on his own will. The biggest flaw of this method was that it could not be used too many times. Therefore, if Soren had a summoning circle in his hand, he could directly use the soul stone to summon low-grade demons. Chapter 308. This thing was very useful. Soren carefully put away the soul stone. Although a half-baked mage like him could not use it, Gloria, a true northern witch, could. It was very useful for Soren, whether it was used to trade with demons or to summon low and intermediate demons to watch. Moreover, intermediate demons began to have divinity. Demons of this level could provide a lot of slaughter EXP, which was enough for Soren to level up. The things in the dragon's nest were all transported to the pirate ship. However, Soren was in a bit of a dilemma when dealing with the adult white dragon's corpse. Strictly speaking, the dragon's corpse was the most useful thing because it could produce rare-grade equipment. Seeing how Soren had not collected a set of rare-grade equipment after so long, it could be seen how rare it was to find a set of rare-grade equipment. The skin of an adult white dragon could be made into a grade 1 rare dragon leather armor. If it was enchanted, it could be made into a grade 2 rare dragon leather armor. The best part of the dragon's skin could even be made into a grade 3 rare dragon leather armor or even legendary dragon leather armor. Even if Soren did not wear the leather armor, he could still use it to equip his core subordinates. Then there was the dragon's blood, bones, meat, and so on. Basically, the whole body of a pure-blooded dragon was a treasure. Even if there were many parts of it that were poisonous, there were corresponding ways to neutralize it. The white dragon's flesh was poisonous. Many parts of it belonged to the great cold, and it could be fatal if eaten carelessly. Many of the epic heroes who dared to eat the dragon's flesh directly had shockingly high constitution, which was 24 or 25 points. Therefore, even if they ate the poisonous wyvern, it would not be a problem. Soren did not dare to eat the white dragon's flesh. If he could not eat it, his subordinates could not eat it either. Therefore, he could only think of a way to transport it back. However, it was also troublesome because the white dragon's corpse was about 20 tons. This weight was equivalent to a large truck, and it was basically impossible to transport it back by manpower. Therefore, Soren could only cut it open and transport it back. However, cutting it open was also a problem. It would reduce the dragon's value, and even if it was cut into a ton of pieces, it would still be cut into 20 pieces. One could imagine. The leather on a dragon's body was almost completely separated. The greatest value of the dragon skin armor was that it was a complete piece of dragon skin, or even a dragon scale armor that covered the entire body. Therefore, cutting it open was definitely not worth the loss. In the end, Soren had no choice but to skin it himself. He peeled off the relatively intact parts of the white dragon's corpse in front of him, then discarded a part of the flesh and collected the more precious parts at the same time. It was difficult to preserve dragon blood because it was easy to solidify. Soren only stored a portion of the best dragon blood near the heart, which was used as an alchemy material. Then there was the ordinary dragon's blood, which directly filled 6 large vats. In the end, all of them solidified into large blood clots. This alchemy was not very useful, but it could be used as a material for dragon's blood ink to copy scrolls. He had plenty of mages anyway. Vivian would need it often in the future, and Soren would need some for himself as well, so he took everything he could with him. The dragon bones were transported to the ship in their entirety, and Soren kept the vertebrae intact. This was very useful and could even be used to build a legendary battleship. Using the dragon bones as the dragon bones of the battleship, naval battles in the future would be unstoppable. Although the dragon wings were a little broken, Soren still carefully peeled them off with his curved sword, and even stacked them to the side. Since the dragon bones were used as the dragon bones of the battleship, the dragon wings would naturally be used as the sails of the ship. If he was going to do it, he would do it all. Soren cut up a pile of various pieces of flesh and bones and transported them to the battleship. When he finally finished, it was almost dark. The valuable items were all transported. In the end, all that was left were large chunks of meat and a complete dragon head. Put everything that can be put on board. Soren stretched his sore wrist. To be honest, it was not easy to skin the dragon. He had to go all out to cut it open, and in the end he was exhausted as if he had just fought a war of attrition. The meat could not be eaten at the moment, but the pharmacists and priests in the city knew how to remove the poison, so it could be sold to others at a high price. Anyway, Soren was not that curious about the dragon meat. He had eaten it many times before and there was no way to cook it. The dragon meat could only be roasted, and it could not be cooked in water that was about 100 degrees Celsius. This took half a day. Soren finally finished everything, and returned to the battleship with his equally tired subordinates. Half of the people he brought were dead, and the rest could only be buried on the spot. In the end, they had to cut up the dragon's body and transport it from the north of the island to the battleship. Almost everyone was exhausted when they came back, and many of them leaned on the deck and gasped for breath. A long night was fraught with problems. After Soren transported the items back, he set sail and headed straight for the northern estuary. He wanted to go to the northern wizard tower. Although there was a delay, he estimated that he would arrive at the deepwater port the day after tomorrow, and then go along the official road to Gloria's wizard tower. There was no doubt that the gifts this time were quite generous. In addition to the porcelain, spices and silk brought from the east, there were also the diamonds, dragon bones, dragon blood, and so on that Soren obtained this time. With such a large amount of gifts, it was enough to be used as a betrothal gift for a princess. Soren had always felt that he owed Gloria a favor, and now that he had the chance to repay it, he naturally wanted to find a way to repay it tenfold. The moon was bright and the stars were few. Soren stood on the deck and looked into the distance, playing with a blue diamond in his hand. The diamond reflected a dreamy light under the moonlight, and one could not help but be mesmerized by it. It had to be said that the diamond was really beautiful. Soren had obtained some diamonds as trophies before, but it was the first time he had seen such a beautiful one. He did not know where the white dragon found it, but Soren felt that such a diamond should not be unknown, and it should have a history. Soren played with it for a while and then put it away. Then he found a piece of wood from the sea that looked like rosewood from the ship. This wood had a faint fragrance, elegant but not strong, and it made people feel refreshed. Soren pulled out his curved sword and with a serious expression, he made a delicate wooden box. He also used his amazing sword skills to carve exquisite patterns on the wooden box. When one's strength reached his level. Basically, Soren was already at the level of a master when it came to carving. After all this, Soren found a piece of smooth and delicate silk, and then spread it out and folded it inside the box. After all this, he picked up the box and looked at it and finally put the blue diamond inside. Patter. He gently closed the box and then nodded with satisfaction. Soren had always been a very sincere person. So since he was going to give some gifts to Gloria, naturally he would try his best to do it. The voyage overseas was still very boring. It was not until the afternoon of the second day that he approached the location of the deepwater port. There were already people waiting here. Soren docked the warship at the port, and then arranged for people to transport the things there. In fact, there were a lot of things to be transported. In the end, even if Soren did not want to, he still alarmed other people in the port. Because of a dragon's head. Such a big dragon would definitely need to hire a carriage. Soren had already arranged a caravan, and porcelain, spices, and silk from the east had been transported there. Now he had to transport another part of the gifts. It was difficult to hide this from the people of the deepwater port, so when others knew about the arrival of the throat cutter, and even knew that he had killed the adult white dragon that had previously harassed the nearby area, the whole deepwater port could not help but boil. Many people felt uneasy and did not know if the southern pirates were preparing to invade the north coast. There were also some people who were eager for the profits of overseas trade, or because of other reasons they tried to get closer to Soren. Unknowingly, the existence of the throat cutter had spread throughout the nearby sea area, and the name seemed to carry a trace of power. It was a very troublesome social interaction. Soren basically rejected all of them, leaving only a small leader to guard the warship. Someone had already brought the news back to Shipwreck Bay, and in about 7 days a fleet would come over. Soren actually had a lot of things to transport back. The next was a very boring journey. With such a large team, there were basically no monsters in the wilderness that dared to attack, so Soren arrived at Gloria's territory very calmly. For some reason, Soren once again approached here, and when he was about to see Gloria, he inexplicably felt a little nervous. P.S. 2 updates today. Mwah. Chapter 309. Nervousness. Soren had this feeling before, but it shouldn't be this time. He didn't know why his palms were sweating, which made him feel a little uncomfortable, but he quickly adjusted himself. The wizard tower in front of him was no different from the one in Soren's memory. This wizard tower wasn't as majestic as the one in the Shadow Plane, and it didn't have a rich history, but it was still an awe-inspiring tower in the north. Because the existence of the wizard tower itself was a symbol of great power. Gloria. After the initial nervousness, Soren thought that he was going to see this woman again, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of joy in his heart. In this world, there were very few people who could make Soren feel a sense of identity, and Gloria just so happened to be one of the few. He couldn't help but feel a little anxious to see her immediately. Soren didn't seem to think that his emotions would change so much in such a short period of time, so when he stepped into the wizard tower, he couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then calmly walked in. His acting skills had improved a lot compared to before. The one in charge of welcoming Soren wasn't a human, but a 2-meter-tall clay golem. When it saw Soren coming in, it bowed slightly and then said in a dull voice, "Sir Soren, the master invites you to the observatory. The rest of you can follow me to the 3rd floor of the wizard tower. The people who came before have been settled there." The inside of the wizard tower was very big. In fact, most of the wizard towers had more floors and each floor had a lot of space. If it was a legendary wizard who had mastered the half-plane technique, then the space inside the wizard tower might be comparable to a city. So Soren concluded that the wizard tower in the Shadow Plane couldn't be taken down in a short time, because the space inside was estimated to be no smaller than the underground ruins of a city. The pirates behind Soren were in awe of the clay golem in front of them. Even though they were strong enough to defeat it, they couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. After all, this was a magical creation of a wizard. The pirates had a natural sense of awe towards the mysterious and terrifying northern witches. This was the accumulated prestige of the spellcasters over a long period of time, even though they had never seen the northern witches before. The existence of spellcasters had always been superior to other professions. After entering the wizard tower, even Soren's most unruly followers became cautious. Another clay golem stepped forward. It led Soren's subordinates to the stairs on the other side, while the clay golem led Soren to the observatory. Magic golem manufacturing process. Not all golems were at the same level because the clay golem in front of Soren was clearly much more agile than the one that had just stepped forward. If the previous one was a rigid golem that could only repeat simple commands, then the one in front of Soren was like a highly intelligent mechanical life that followed certain rules and could talk to it. This kind of golem was quite difficult to make. Not only did it require a lot of money, but it also required power that involved the soul domain. There probably weren't many in the entire wizard tower. The clay golem in front of him seemed to have received soul molding. It was like a highly intelligent robot. Soren had always been interested in this kind of alchemy. Unfortunately, the requirements for mastering it were too high. Not only did it require an amazing level of magic and alchemy skills, but it also required a lot of special knowledge by analogy. Soren estimated that he couldn't even make the simplest cleaning golem. This was the difference between a professional wizard and a half-baked wizard. Strictly speaking, Soren should now be a professional rogue and a half-baked spellcaster. Otherwise, a wizard with a profession level of 10 or so should be able to make the simplest clay golem. Soul domain. It gave the puppets the corresponding intelligence and even directly gave them life. Gloria has touched the realm of a legendary wizard? Soren seemed to suddenly think of something. He couldn't help but tremble, and then a smile appeared on his face. He found that if this was really the case, he was more than 90% sure that he would be able to invite Gloria to the outer islands. Walking up the wizard tower floor by floor, Soren saw a lot of strange things. Some were magic devices that he couldn't understand, and some were all kinds of strange laboratories. This undoubtedly told Soren that his decision to invite Gloria was right. Just the various devices in the wizard tower in front of him had already made him a little dizzy. The wizard tower needed a professional spellcaster to deal with it. Otherwise, Soren wouldn't even know what the general area was, how the laboratories should be distributed, the layout of the elemental pool, and so on. Squeak. When Soren reached the 6th floor, he heard a sound that sounded like a mouse. As he turned around, he immediately saw 3 giant bats that were locked in a cage. These bats were all the size of a wash basin and looked a little scary. Their mouths were full of sharp fangs, and one of them could even spit out the spell rainbow spray. These were the magic bats that wizards were researching. They were a special kind of magical life and had all kinds of abilities. They were also the most commonly encountered monsters in the wizard tower. They were the standard rookie killers. If they encountered magic bats in the wild, the chances of them dying were quite high. Most wizards were academic researchers. Therefore, Soren wasn't surprised at all that there were some magical creatures locked in here. Starting from the 6th floor, the golem puppets that were responsible for guarding the tower were replaced by steel golems. They were iron lumps that weighed about half a ton. Some of the specially improved steel golems +1 could weigh about 2 tons. The surface of these golems was made of steel, and their hardness was similar to modern steel. They also had alchemy enchantment resistance, and were considered to be quasi-legendary monsters. Under normal circumstances, even a legendary warrior would have to spend a lot of effort to dismantle a steel golem. There was once a legendary monk who described it this way: "Dealing with steel golems always gives me the feeling of dismantling a tank with my bare hands." This sentence was very popular at that time. Unfortunately, later on, this legendary monk encountered the diamond golem +1, and was defeated on the spot. It was also because of this. The diamond golem +1, that had the ability to float, was described as a Gundam. Inside Gloria's wizard tower, Soren didn't see the +1 puppet golem. This was a special modified golem that would only appear in ruins such as the Arcane Empire. However, when he approached the top of the wizard tower, a steel golem about 2 meters tall with a somewhat different appearance attracted Soren's attention. The appearance of this steel golem was actually similar to what he saw at the beginning, but it had a very special behavior after seeing Soren. It actually bowed slightly to Soren to show respect. It was a conscious golem. Although it was not a very high level of consciousness, it had exceeded the most basic golem intelligent golem construct. Activated golem. Someone had blessed it with a spell close to the legendary level, turning it into a complete life form. It would gradually begin to have consciousness. Although its core command would not change, which was similar to the core structure of the 3 laws of robots, other things would gradually move closer to intelligent life. This was how the golem construct appeared. Soren didn't expect there to be such a thing in Gloria's wizard tower, but he didn't seem to have seen it when he came last time. If such a steel golem continued to evolve, it could become the Thaling that Soren saw in the Shadow Plane wizard tower. A special life form with legendary challenge difficulty. It seems that I didn't make a mistake this time. Soren hadn't seen Gloria yet, but after walking around the wizard tower and looking all the way from below, he was more confident about exploring the wizard tower in the Shadow Plane. However, Soren also knew that Gloria could show him the internal structure of the wizard tower. Otherwise, these steel golems would usually be on standby in special positions. The golems needed the elemental pool of the wizard tower to provide energy, or they could only use some expensive materials to provide energy. In other words, the wizard tower usually operated less than 1/10 of the golems. A door appeared in front of him. When Soren walked to the door, his palms sweated involuntarily, and then he pushed the door directly. A ray of sunlight shone over. Soren first saw the sun in the sky, then the vast land in the distance, a city near the mountains, countless scattered villages, a winding river, and a dense forest further away. These were all glorious territory. The wizard tower was like a tall skyscraper, overlooking everything directly. Even the white clouds in the sky seemed to be within reach. This kind of scene was very shocking, and it seemed to make men's blood boil with excitement. High and mighty. A tower that symbolized the power and status of a spellcaster. "You're back." A gentle female voice sounded, coming from Soren's side. When Soren turned to look at the seat on the right side of the observatory, his whole body suddenly trembled, and a stunned expression appeared on his face. In front of him was a large and comfortable recliner covered with soft snow-white fur. Gloria was lazily lying on it, and her face was still as beautiful as it was in his memory. She was the most typical beauty of the northern lands. She had a tall and graceful body, firm and slender thighs, a slender and flexible waist and full breasts. No matter how one looked at her, she was impeccable. But this wasn't enough to make Soren stunned. Because Soren was a man with strong willpower. But at this moment, Gloria seemed to have a strange charm. Even Soren, who had a strong willpower, was shocked, and he felt as if he was under a charmed spell. Because at this moment, Gloria was wearing a snow-white nightgown. There was a slight slit below the waist and soft and shiny black stockings could be seen. This was a product of the Underdark and only rich women could have it. It was woven with the best spider silk, and its value was similar to rare equipment. Stockings. In such an era, in such a world, stockings that were once everywhere seemed to have become very rare. This was Soren's second time seeing a woman wearing stockings. The first time was Gloria's mother, a woman with a seductive face. Soren was afraid of this seductive woman, and also had a trace of hostility in his heart, so he didn't admire her in stockings. But now that Gloria was wearing it, she was unusually beautiful, and seemed to have an irresistible temptation. Especially when she stretched out her black pearl-like toes, wrapped in the smooth and shiny stockings, he had the urge to reach out and touch them. But this wasn't enough. Just this alone wasn't enough to make Soren feel stunned. Because Gloria in front of him, in addition to wearing a snow-white nightgown, she also wore a pair of gold-rimmed black-rimmed glasses on her delicate nose. This was a product of alchemy and had been used for a long time in this world. Even ordinary people would buy relatively cheap single-rimmed glasses. But Gloria's glasses were undoubtedly much more exquisite, and it seemed to be an enchanted rare item. She was holding a thick book with both hands, and the front of the book had complicated runes imprinted on it. Before Soren came in, she was frowning slightly as she read the book. When Soren came in, she closed the book and put it on her lower abdomen. She looked very gentle and charming. At first glance, she gave off the elegant temperament of a lady from a noble family. At this moment, Soren even felt the aura of an oriental beauty from Gloria's body. As if she noticed Soren's burning gaze, Gloria's beautiful face slightly blushed. She delicately shrunk her legs, covered her black stockings with the hem of her nightgown, and then slightly curled up her pearl-like toes. It seemed that she was a little nervous under Soren's gaze, and her delicate face seemed to be a little uneasy. But after all, she was a northern witch. He only saw Gloria gently smile, slowly lifting her white fingers to lift up her long hair, and then teasingly said, "Am I beautiful?" A lock of silky long hair was tucked behind her ear. It was mixed with silver strands, but this silver hair did not affect Gloria's beauty at all. On the contrary, it made her look more charming. Soren had long noticed this silver hair. Although he did not ask Gloria what was going on, he could guess that it was most likely related to himself and Vivian. At the thought of this, Soren's heart seemed to have been touched. Even if he had always been a very hard-hearted person, now there was a trace of emotion in his heart, an inexplicable emotion that was hard to describe. He nodded seriously and said, "I almost thought that I was under a charm spell. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." A trace of blush appeared. Gloria didn't seem to think that Soren would use such a serious tone and say such frivolous words like flirting. However, after listening to it, she enjoyed it very much and was inexplicably happy in her heart. Negotiation +10. P.S. This chapter took me a whole day to write. Sure enough, emotional drama is not my specialty. 4,000 words. Add more tomorrow. Chapter 310. The atmosphere suddenly became a little awkward. Both of their expressions were a little awkward, but it wasn't that kind of awkwardness but a different kind of awkwardness. When their eyes met, they couldn't help but avoid each other's gaze. Gloria's beautiful face even turned red. An inexplicable feeling was brewing, and both of them seemed to have felt something. This little awkwardness didn't last long, and Soren quickly recovered. He smiled and bent down to take out a beautiful box, then handed it to Gloria. "A gift for you." Soren blinked, which was rare for him. Gloria looked up at him, and the corner of her mouth revealed a quiet smile. Her red lips gently opened and said, "What gift?" Soren shrugged his shoulders and casually sat down on the recliner. Because he was about to sit down, Gloria subconsciously moved a little to the side. By the time she reacted, Soren had already sat down next to her. Although the recliner was relatively wide, the two people sitting on it were naturally very close to each other. It was easy to smell the man's scent, which made her face reveal a trace of shyness. However, she did not show any obvious signs of anger. Soren smelled the faint fragrance at the tip of his nose and said naturally, "Open it and take a look." Gloria's delicate body showed signs of tension, especially when Soren sat next to her and talked. There was a natural masculine scent coming from him. Soren's breathing entered her ears, and she could feel his breath blowing on her long hair, which made her even more nervous. Even though she was a knowledgeable northern witch and controlled a large territory under her feet, Gloria's back couldn't help but tense up, and goosebumps appeared on her earlobes. She was very nervous. Soren didn't do anything else. He sat down and waited with a smile, waiting for Gloria to open the gift and waiting for her to relax. After all, northern witches weren't ordinary women. Even though she had never been so close to a man before, she quickly adjusted herself. Gloria turned her head and looked at Soren with a somewhat reproachful look. It seemed that she was blaming him for suddenly sitting down and startling her, but there was no anger on her face and she didn't get up from the recliner. The distance between the two was less than half a centimeter, and the thin pajamas couldn't resist the heat coming from beside her. Gloria's cheeks slightly flushed, more obvious than before, like the sunset on the horizon. She gently lifted the delicate box in front of her, couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then slowly opened it. A dazzling light. The brilliance of the diamond was refracted the moment it was opened. Even the knowledgeable northern witches were attracted by the beautiful blue diamond in front of them at this moment. Although Soren didn't have a high enough appraisal ability to judge the specific value of this diamond, he still had many years of experience. Even he felt that something extraordinary was naturally quite rare. Gloria was actually prepared in her heart, but when she saw the huge shining blue diamond in front of her, her eyes couldn't help but blur. Sometimes women were very similar to dragons. Even Vivian was no exception to this. Soren had seen the little girl count the gemstones she had collected more than once. It's so beautiful. Gloria picked up the blue diamond in front of her with her white fingers, and then looked at it under the sun. She looked at it for a while and then her eyes gradually became clear. Gloria put it back in the delicate box, carefully put it away and then said softly, "It seems that even the royal family doesn't have many diamonds like this. Did you find it in the dragon's nest?" Soren nodded gently and said, "Yes." Gloria turned to look at Soren beside her. The two people's arms rubbed slightly, and there was a soft and smooth touch. She looked at the man in front of her seriously as if she was getting to know him again and murmured, "Sometimes I really can't see through you. You were born in the slums, but you have a lot of knowledge that wizards don't necessarily have. When I first met you, you were just a low-level thief, but now you've completed the feat of slaying a dragon alone. Sometimes I really wonder if you're the one favored by fate." Soren didn't answer this question. The ones favored by fate were a different kind of existence. They were a group of people outside of fate, and their fate was freer than the gods. In the eyes of wizards who were proficient in divination, the ones favored by fate were similar to the Prince of Lies. They were a group of people who, in the story when the goddess of luck threw a lucky coin, the coin would stand up. Soren wasn't sure if he was such a person. Therefore this kind of person was quite rare and he was never a person who liked to be arrogant. Unless he got the legendary card of fate. After Gloria put away the gift, she gently stood up. She tilted her head and looked at Soren playfully and then said, "Actually, I also prepared a gift for you. Come with me." Soren took a deep breath. As if he was chasing after the delicate fragrance that wafted out when she stood up, his face showed a trace of intoxication. Gloria stared at him with a somewhat reproachful expression, and then raised her white finger to activate a teleportation circle on the right side of the observatory. Teleportation could be done inside the wizard tower. The northern witch stood there beautifully as if she was waiting for Soren to come over. Soren came over. He reached out and held Gloria's hand, the kind where their 5 fingers were interlocked. He could feel the softness of her hand, and the sweat that overflowed from her palm. It turned out that he had been very nervous. At this moment, the two people couldn't help but look at each other, and then the corners of their mouth could not help but show a trace of a smile. Gloria's eyes were soft and her palm was soft. She didn't want to break free, and naturally let Soren hold her hand, and then gently activated the teleportation circle. The two figures disappeared in a white light, and then appeared in a room on the upper floor of the wizard tower. This seemed to be Gloria's bedroom. As an excellent northern witch, Gloria's room didn't have the feeling of a woman's boudoir. Most of the things here were books. Soren just glanced around and saw hundreds of books on the bookshelves, tables and chairs. Almost every book was as thick as a brick. The whole room was quite simple and tidy. The floor was covered with a soft carpet, and there were chairs next to the desk. Next to the desk were some small trinkets, which seemed to be alchemy supplies, and then there was a bed on the side. There were almost no decorations. No wonder Vivian learned the good habit of reading books. As if guessing Soren's thoughts, Gloria turned around and rolled her eyes at him and whispered, This is just a place to rest after conducting research. She gently raised her finger, and a faint magic light appeared on one of the drawers. This was Gloria removing a magic trap, and then she saw the drawer automatically open. A rather delicate-looking belt appeared and fell directly into her palm. Gloria smiled at Soren, handed the belt to him and said softly, "I prepared it for you. Legendary equipment?" As soon as Soren's fingertips touched the belt in front of him, his whole body couldn't help but tremble. Then he looked up at Gloria in surprise and murmured, "The power of the frost giant?" This time it was Gloria's turn to be surprised, and she wondered, "You know it? It has been in the hands of the Witch Council for hundreds of years. I also got it because of some recent things." She would never tell Soren that she got a chance from the Northern Witch Council because she was promoted to a quasi-legendary witch. They could choose a legendary equipment they wanted from the treasury of the Northern Witch Council. She did not choose other legendary spellcaster equipment, but brought out this second-grade legendary belt, Frost Giant Strength, from the treasury of the Witch Council. "Yes." Soren nodded gently, reached out and stroked the belt in front of him and whispered, "I've heard of it before." In his memory, this second-grade legendary belt was auctioned at a sky-high price of 270,000 Kindler coins. It was the best legendary belt that could be obtained in the entire material plane. Chapter 311. Frost Giant Strength. It was a legendary belt of strength made from the skin of the Frost Giant King. It allowed the wearer to have the strength of an adult frost giant. It was the best belt of strength in the material plane. Basically, if you wanted better equipment, you could only find it in other planes. There were two complete Frost Giant Strength, the Belt of Frost Giant Strength and the Glove of Frost Giant Strength. However, the Glove of Frost Giant Strength was destroyed in a legendary battle. Therefore, a legendary mage fused and enchanted the Belt of Frost Giant Strength, which was preserved from a Grade 1 legendary item to a Grade 2 legendary item. Since then there was only one Frost Giant Strength left. In the past, the Frost Giant Strength set increased the user's strength by 4 points respectively. Together, it could increase the user's strength by 8 points, reaching a maximum of 22 points. Basically, after equipping this set of legendary items, an ordinary adult man with 10 points of strength would immediately become an unparalleled warrior with 18 points of strength. After the enchantment, the Belt of Frost Giant Strength became a Grade 2 legendary item, increasing the user's strength by 6 points. It was a pity that there was only one item left. Gloria quietly looked at Soren and slowly said, "Let's take a look." Soren glanced at her, then untied the belt on his body and put on the Belt of Frost Giant Strength. At the same time he took off the Ogre's Strength bracer on his arm. This kind of rare equipment could only be worn once. After putting on the Belt of Frost Giant Strength, the Ogre's Strength bracer would lose its effect. There were certain requirements for relying on external forces to increase the user's strength. It could be roughly divided into 3 parts. The first was the strength of equipment, the second was the strength of spells, and the third was the explosive power of the user. The first was the Ogre's Strength bracer, the Belt of Frost Giant Strength, and so on. These things could not be stacked and there were certain restrictions. The second was the strength of spells. For example, Soren started with Brute Strength, and then Vivian gave him Draconic Strength. Then the effect of Brute Strength would be covered by Draconic Strength, just like how the Ogre's Strength was covered by Draconic Strength. As for the last type of strength buff, it was a type of power boost that only appeared on berserkers, barbarians, and other professions. Soren's Slaughterer transformation seemed to be a type of potential boost, which was why it could stack with the strength of his equipment and the strength of his spells. Crack. Soren slowly buckled his belt. As soon as he put on this Tier 2 legendary item, his entire body was filled with a warm feeling of power. He tried to pick up a cup next to him, but he did not expect that he would crush it with too much force. After a while, he relied on the coordination ability brought by his agility to control the sudden increase in strength. This was the most valuable transcendent equipment. This was because the power it gave was constant. As long as one wore it, they would always have this power. Item type: Belt of Frost Giant Strength. Item grade: Tier 2 legendary. Item description: this is a legendary item with a long history. It seems to have originated from a defeated Frost Giant King. At first, it was made by a great mage into the Frost Giant's Strength gloves and Belt of Frost Giant Strength. However, because of a legendary battle, one of them was destroyed. However, someone still used the destroyed equipment to remodel and enchant this belt, further increasing its power. In this belt, there is a text engraved, "The Last King of Frost Giants." Equipment requirements: none. Equipment effect: increase strength by 6 points, up to a maximum of 22 points. The strength of an adult frost giant. Soren flipped the belt over. Sure enough, he saw a text at the interface, "The Last King of Frost Giants." Gloria looked at Soren up and down with satisfaction. She even circled around him. It was not like she was looking at the effect of the belt, but more like she was looking at whether it fit him or not. He had to admit that women were strange creatures. Even if such a legendary equipment did not fit him, he still had to wear it. He wondered how much it could increase his combat power. It fits just right. Gloria nodded with satisfaction, and a smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. Soren moved a little and found that it was indeed quite fitting. It basically did not affect his combat power. But when he was about to say something, the whole wizard tower suddenly shook, and then it shook a little. In an instant, both Soren and Gloria reacted quickly. Gloria's figure almost disappeared in an instant, and then she appeared near the window. At the same time, a magic aura appeared on her body. It seemed that she had activated more than 3 protective energy fields. Soren's reaction was not too far away. The legendary curved sword Icing Death instantly appeared in his palm, and then he leaped to the left side of the room, holding the sword with both hands to protect Gloria's side. It had to be said. At this moment their cooperation was quite good. The wizard tower was still shaking slightly. Whether it was Gloria or Soren, they could not help but look dignified. Because now the whole wizard tower was shaking a little, and dust was trembling from the ceiling. Both of them were quite clear about the defensive ability of the wizard tower. For such a situation to happen, it was definitely a big deal. It's not an enemy attack. A crystal ball appeared in Gloria's palm. She gently touched it, then frowned and said, "It's a vibration from the ground." Earthquake? Soren looked at Gloria in confusion. Both of their expressions were a little strange. Was it really an earthquake? But just when they were puzzled, the wizard tower shook more violently, and then a strong magic aura appeared at the top of the astrology platform. "Her Excellency the Eye of the North is summoning us." Gloria reached out and touched a crystal button on her chest, and then a white light appeared in her palm. Soren and her figure appeared on the top of the astrology platform again. Is it really an earthquake? Soren looked at the city in the distance. He could see that a part of the city wall was cracked. This was definitely a large-scale earthquake. And the intensity of the earthquake was quite high. Houses in the distant city had collapsed, but there were not many casualties in the scattered villages because the houses were made of wood and straw. But the trembling of the earth still frightened many people. Soren could see people gathering together in a panic like ants from afar. "Gloria, activate the magic array." A hoarse and old female voice appeared on the astrology platform, and then a hazy shadow appeared. It was a white-haired witch. The most eye-catching thing was her eyes. Almost all of her eyeballs were white. Soren had a certain impression of this existence because she was the strongest witch in the north. The legendary Eye of the North. Hearing the Eye of the North's command, Gloria activated a magic array on the wizard tower without hesitation. Then a beam of light shot into the sky. 1 beam, 2 beams, 3 beams. In the distance Soren began to see beams of light. These beams of light went straight into the sky and intertwined with each other. It seemed to be a mysterious huge magic array. The light of the silver moon, magic lock. An unbelievably huge force erupted. It was still daytime, but there was a full moon in the sky. Under the light of the full moon, all the beams of light formed a magic lock, covering a considerable area in it. This was a legendary magic lock, and also the strongest killing move of the Witch Council. It was a magic lock inherited and preserved from the destroyed ancient Silver Moon City before the Arcane Empire. Soren remembered that it had killed a weak god incarnate, but it seemed that it had only been activated a few times in hundreds of years. Activate the magic lock. The Eye of the North's expression was quite serious. She looked at the sky with her pale pupils and said in a hoarse voice, "There is an enemy invasion. All members of the Witch Council above grade 4, follow me to the astral world." Soul projection. Legendary spell, Astral World Gate. Legendary spell. A gate with a strange light appeared in the center of the magic circle, and all the wizard towers were included in the protection of the magic lock. Then a shadow of a soul appeared. The soul projection of the Eye of the North was like a female giant in the sky. At first glance, it was probably thousands of meters high, just like the legendary magic transformation. With the appearance of the huge soul projection, rays of magic light also appeared, and other soul shadows began to appear around her. This was the legendary witch who had existed for hundreds of years in the legends. She cast a legendary spell with every move. Before Soren had time to recover from this dazzling change, he saw Gloria next to him also walking to the center of the light beam. It seemed that she intended to project her soul into the astral world. After all, she was still a northern witch, a high-grade member of the Witch Council. Now even the Eye of the North was alarmed. Something big must have happened in the astral world. At this moment, Soren almost didn't think much about it. He reached out and grabbed her arm. He wanted to tell Gloria how dangerous the astral world was, but when he saw Gloria's determined eyes, he could only sigh helplessly. However, when Gloria thought that Soren would let go of his hand and let her go, she didn't expect that Soren actually held her palm. The two people's fingers were interlocked. Under Gloria's surprised and moved expression, Soren stepped into the light beam that connected to the astral world gate. The bodies of the two people froze at this moment. Then two souls appeared outside the body, turned into a ray of light, and went straight to the astral world gate. Since she had made up her mind to go to the astral world, Soren could only accompany her. P.S. I need to organize the information. The astral world will be different. That's all for today. Chapter 312. It was a wonderful feeling to have one's soul leave one's body. Although it wasn't the first time Soren tried to project his soul out of his body, it was the first time he tried it in the real world. The strongest feeling was the weightlessness of his soul. Without the shackles of gravity, his soul felt light. However, it wasn't a complete soul that left his body. The moment it touched the light beam, Soren's soul was molded into a soul projection and sent directly to the astral gate. The soul projection was only a part of the soul. It wasn't the weight of a complete soul, so if it died, it wouldn't necessarily cause the body in the real world to die as well. However, it would definitely cause a terrible amount of damage to the soul. If the damage was too great, it could turn the person into an idiot or even affect the real world, causing the existence of the soul projection to die on the spot. This could be understood simply according to the East. If the soul projection died, it would be like the scattering of a part of the 3 souls and 7 spirits in Eastern mythology. It was possible for the projection to become crazy, or directly become an idiot. It was even possible for the projection to become a vegetable or die on the spot. Normally, this kind of soul projection would only be used in extremely dangerous places. It could also be used in places where the physical body couldn't reach. This would greatly reduce the cost of death. Their souls were remolded into half-energy bodies. The power of the soul projection was greatly reduced. Soren only kept about 80% of his strength, and all of his equipment below legendary level was left on his body. This was the reason why he didn't like to go to the astral gate. Low-tier rare items couldn't be converted into half-energy. Only legendary equipment and above could be converted into soul projection, and it would be left on the soul projection after death. Therefore, even legendary wizards wouldn't bring their strongest legendary equipment with them when they were in the soul projection state. However, Soren couldn't leave his equipment on his body. All of his legendary equipment would directly affect his combat ability. Going to the astral gate without legendary equipment would be suicide. A brief moment of dizziness. When Soren and Gloria regained their consciousness, they were already in front of the astral gate. At this moment, there were about 12 soul projections gathered around the Eye of the North. When these soul projections noticed Soren's appearance, they couldn't help but show a trace of surprise on their faces. They then looked at Gloria in confusion. When they saw the expression on her face, the other witches couldn't help but smile mischievously. It seemed like Gloria was quite popular, unlike her mother who wasn't likable. All of the witches present were high-grade adepts, and at least a third of them were quasi-legendary adepts. As for witches like Her Excellency Eye of the North, whose profession level was around level 25, it was estimated that there were not many witches like her in the whole world, so she should be the most powerful one among all of them. If that was the case, Soren was actually the weakest among the soul projections, and she was also a half-baked wizard. As for Soren's arrival, the Eye of the North didn't say much. She just glanced at him for a moment, then nodded at Gloria and said with a serious expression, "Prepare to teleport. Everyone focus." The astral gate that had already been opened suddenly enveloped them. Immediately after, it was as if they had entered a rainbow light channel. Countless light spots that could not be seen with the naked eye shuttled back and forth in front of them. Therefore, the only thing that could be seen with the naked eye was many rainbow-like rays of light. Soul projections were the simplest way to cross planes. Many abyss demons and hell devils would use this method to travel to other planes. When a soul projection died, it would only reduce a part of their strength. Most of the time, it wouldn't cause the death of the soul projection. Adepts cherished their own lives very much. Therefore, even in the face of a powerful enemy, the Eye of the North didn't ask the other witches to go to the astral gate with their bodies. The feeling of a soul passing through a membrane came. Or it should be said that it was a bit like a person sinking into the sea. When Soren opened his eyes again, he was already standing on a very barren land. Above this land was a silver river, and there were almost no plants around. The feeling was like standing on the surface of the moon and looking at the universe. In front of him was a boundless silver river, like the Milky Way where countless stars gathered. Around this seemingly small piece of land, one could see countless star matter, as well as objects that were streaking past at high speed like meteors. It could be just a comet, or it could be the corpse of an ancient god. The astral gate had become a huge garbage dump. In countless years, countless people had entered here and died here. There were also all kinds of existences that entered the astral gate for other reasons. In the end, the astral gate had completely turned into a huge garbage dump. In this garbage dump, you could find the corpse of an ancient god, hidden half-planes, fallen divine kingdoms, and even broken floating fortresses, huge astral warships, and so on. Almost everything you could think of could be found here. Because this was a huge and all-encompassing garbage dump. It was also the most dangerous garbage dump. There was no air in the astral gate, so it was not easy for flesh and blood to survive here. They had to rely on the half-planes floating in the astral gate. Therefore, many travelers who entered the astral gate were soul projections in a semi-energy state, or powerful existences that were directly close to the form of a saint. In this endless astral gate there was a kind of energy. Wizards called it source substance, and thought it was the most basic structure of the universe. However, Soren still preferred to call it by another name. Dark energy. Almost all half-planes must be connected to the astral gate and the ether plane. The half-plane was a very special existence that was difficult to explain in a few words. However, one thing that could be easily understood was that even legendary wizards could not provide the huge amount of energy needed to open up a half-plane. Therefore, all half-planes grew little by little. This was very similar to the divine kingdoms, but the energy for the growth of half-planes only came from two places. One was the astral gate. The other was the ether plane. These two planes had an inexplicable relationship, and the structure of energy was also unknown. However, the astral gate was closer to the outer plane, while the ether plane was closer to the inner plane. Soren was standing on a half-plane. Because there were very few material structures inside the astral gate, there was almost no doubt that most of the material in the astral gate came from other planes. Therefore, it was always called a garbage dump. Even the half-plane under Soren's feet was a huge piece of garbage floating in the endless astral gate. The half-plane was the carrier. Without the support of this half-plane, Soren and the other witches' soul projections would be directly exposed to the source substance of the astral gate, which was the silver torrent above their heads. This was a more troublesome thing because this torrent of energy generated from the distorted space would have many dangerous astral gate creatures living in it. Even the gods might not know the secrets of the astral gate, but they knew how to use the energy of the astral gate. The original creation of the world was made from the source substance energy. There were many things that Soren was not too clear about. He could not remember much, but he knew that outside the torrent of energy that was like the Milky Way, there was an endless amount of dark energy in something called the crystal wall. The soul entered the astral gate. A lot of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes in an instant. Soul projection completed. Soul entered the astral gate. Soul came into contact with dark matter energy. Soul came into contact with source substance energy. You've received some information about the epic background ability, Astral Traveler. You've received some information about the epic background ability, Plane Explorer. Soul structure completed. Soul projection transformed into dark energy. You've automatically learned the ability, Instant Spell. All spells below level 6 have entered the instant spell state. From the moment they stepped into the astral gate, everyone's spell-casting ability began to skyrocket, as if some kind of shackle had been broken, and they were forcibly breaking free from the shackles of matter. Then they came into contact with the most primitive and essential energy. This energy was everywhere, and it allowed them to automatically learn the ability to instant spell. Although they could still feel the magic net, it was as if they had jumped out of the magic net's effect and did not need the magic net to gather energy. All spellcasters who entered the astral gate automatically learned the ability, Instant Spell. All spells below level 6 could be instantly cast, and legendary spells only needed half the casting time. And this was before they even got close to the Sea of Source Substance. If they got close to the Milky Way or if they came into contact with the energy escaping from the distorted space, then even legendary spells could be instantly cast. As long as your soul could withstand this energy, the astral gate could give you endless energy. Because it was the place closest to the essence of the universe. A world appeared in front of Soren's eyes. It was a huge half-plane. The outer layer was a gray iris that looked like a translucent eggshell. There was a complete world inside, but it did not have the structure of a planet. Instead, it looked more like a continental shelf. This was a half-plane that was born in the astral plane. Using the endless energy of the astral plane as a supply, the land, rocks, mountains, seas, air, plants, and so on grew in the half-plane. In the end, it evolved into a relatively complete half-plane that could support intelligent life. This incomparably huge demi-plane flew past at high speed. It was like Halley's Comet that streaked across the sky above Earth, and it quickly disappeared from Soren's sight. The astral gate was almost endless. It was a plane that was almost limitless, but if you kept going up, you would meet a layer of crystal wall. However, before you met the crystal wall, you would see countless kingdoms of gods. If you were lucky, you could even see the legendary Pantheon plane. Rumble. The ground under Soren's feet shook. This half-plane seemed to have only existed for a short period of time. Soren could see the edge of the land at a glance, and if he jumped from the edge, he would enter the void. Since ancient times, there had never been a lack of unlucky people who were lost in the astral gate and were swept away by the void for hundreds or thousands of years. Therefore, the astral gate was often called the land of exile. This place was connected to all the planes, but you might not be able to find the passage. Without the half-plane to rely on, after being swept into the void, it was like a mortal being washed away by a flood. The half-plane that had been born for no more than a few hundred years was trembling. It was as if something was attacking it. Soren could feel the dignified and worried face of the Eye of the North. Even the most powerful witch in the North was worried. Then, the enemy that appeared was most likely the intelligent life that Soren hated the most. P.S. This chapter took me a whole day to write. I was sorting out the database, so I wrote it very slowly. I had to fill in a lot of things by myself. A lot of brain cells died. From the legendary book onwards, the information provided began to be full of loopholes, and Fu-Tu was a stubborn person. Today I only have one update. I want to draw a three-dimensional picture of the crystal wall universe. If it is not ugly, I will send it for you to have a look. Chapter 313. There were many incomprehensible and dangerous creatures in the astral plane. However, there were only two kinds of creatures that Soren hated. One was the legendary abominations, which were the descendants of the dead gods. They were dangerous creatures full of destructive desires. The other was the Githyankis, a humanoid creature that lived in the astral plane. They were aggressive and warlike, and there were many of them. The possibility of encountering abominations was relatively low because most of these divine monsters were sealed because they were too dangerous. So, it was not surprising that they were the Githyankis that Soren hated the most. The Githyankis were humanoid creatures that lived in the astral plane. They were born with powerful psionic spells. They used to be slaves of the Soul Suckers, which was the monster that ate the brains of intelligent creatures like the Beholder in the Bard stories. So, they were absolutely irreconcilable with the Soul Suckers. Basically, they would fight to the death whenever they met. The Grey Dwarfs had the same characteristics as them. They also hated the Soul Suckers, and many of them had their minds distorted because of the enslavement of the Soul Suckers. In the end, they gained powerful psionic powers. It seemed that both races were like this. The slaves of the Soul Suckers began to master psionic powers later on. Maybe it was because of the sequelae of mind enslavement. Domestication, enslavement, slaughter. Soul Suckers. There were two branches of this creature, the Githyankis and the Githsleys. They hated each other as much as they hated the Soul Suckers. They were so bored that they would fight whenever they met. However, the Githsleys were very rare. They lived in seclusion in some unknown planes. On the contrary, the Githyankis were often encountered, and they were very difficult to deal with. Their highest leader was the queen. They basically had no faith, so they did not have any priests, because they believed that believing in the gods meant betraying the queen. The Githyanki's were mainly warriors. Their weapons were the iconic silver swords, and one of their characteristics was to cut the silver thread. When the soul projection traveled between planes, there would be an invisible silver thread connecting his soul and body. If the silver thread was cut, the soul would be forced to return, and at the same time, it would cause a certain amount of damage. However, the damage would not be as high as if the soul projection died directly in the astral plane. This race was very interesting. Soren had always thought that they were a bit like the Protoss in StarCraft. However, their way of rule made Soren feel a bit like the Queen of Blades of the Zerg. The Githyanki's were strictly militarized. They roamed the astral world, plundering and opening up new wastelands. They lived in astral world battleships or astral world fortresses. Such huge flying structures were a little like the huge military fortresses of the interstellar era. The Githyanki's were notorious for plundering any creatures that could be plundered in the astral plane. They also liked to capture slaves. They would try to capture any enemy that was not a soul projection. Because the Githyanki's had psionic power like soul suckers, they could use a spell-like ability called mind control. Test of will. Prepare for battle. A voice rang out in everyone's mind. Then rays of magical light appeared one after another. Almost 10 rays of magical light appeared consecutively, and in the end even Soren was buffed with 7 or 8 protective spells. In the astral plane, any spellcaster could instantly cast spells below level 6, so the combat power of the wizards here was quite amazing. However, instantly casting spells below level 6 also meant that their battle endurance would sharply decrease, and it was very likely that they would use up all their spell slots in a short while. Group Bull's Strength. Strength +4, Group Cat's Grace. Dexterity +4, Group Fox's Cunning. Intelligence +4, Group Bear's Endurance. Constitution +4, Protection from Evil. Protection from Petrification. Luck. Haste. 10 feet invisibility. More than 10 high-grade northern witches cast spells at the same time. How spectacular the scene was. Standing around Soren were the ruling class of the entire northern region. They represented the highest combat power of the northern region and the ruling power of the northern region above the secular world. The magic aura in the sky was simply dazzling. The instant cast of spells below the 6th circle made them wrapped in various energy shields in an instant. At the same time, Soren was also affected by a lot of spells. These northern witches were not to be underestimated. They might look frail and delicate, but they could still wield their staffs with ferocity in close combat. Gloria's expression was unprecedentedly dignified. She took out a special staff from her body, which was inlaid with many gems. At the same time, she took out a large stack of spell scrolls with her other hand and put them in a place that could be accessed at any time. She was not the only one who did this. The other northern witches around her did the same. They held staves that stored more than 10 spells and prepared a large stack of spell scrolls that they usually copied. Because if the next battle broke out, it was time for them to throw out spell scrolls like crazy. In contrast, Soren looked like a country bumpkin. Although he also had the ability to cast spells instantly, he didn't know many spells. Moreover, spell scrolls easily cost hundreds or thousands of gold coins. If he didn't have the ability to copy spell scrolls himself, it would be like throwing away a desperate gambit. Hundreds of kindler pieces were thrown out at once. 20 kindler pieces weighed about 1 pound, so throwing out a spell scroll was equivalent to throwing out 5 kilograms of gold. Take it. Gloria put 3 spell scrolls into Soren's palm in a row, and then said with a serious expression, "You really shouldn't have come in with me. This is the astral plane. It's difficult for a rogue to play much role here. Be careful later. If something goes wrong, use these spell scrolls." Mages had always been throwing money at people. In just this round, more than a dozen northern witches present burned up tens of thousands of kindler spell scrolls. Then they saw the space of the half-bit wall vibrate, and then a huge military fortress appeared in their sight. It passed through the silver torrent and appeared on the edge of the half-bit wall. With a strange psionic brilliance, it broke the independent rules of the half-bit wall and then squeezed in like a bubble. The half-bit wall had an independent plane law, which eventually formed an iris similar to the atmosphere. Unfortunately, the power of this law was too weak to stop the Githyanki's war fortress at all. One figure after another leaped down from the sky. They jumped directly from a height of hundreds of meters, then used psionic spells to reduce their speed in mid-air, and then landed on the ground of the half-bit wall. Githyanki's. This was a race that was born with both magic and martial arts, with superb combat skills and powerful psionic power. From the outside, these Githyanki's had obvious human-like characteristics, but they looked very thin. They were about 1.8 meters tall and weighed about 170 pounds. These people had rough yellow skin, their hair was tied into small braids, the color of their pupils was dim, their ears were pointed, and there were saw-like bones on their backs. These Githyanki's were well-equipped, all wearing first-class armor, and their weapons were silver blades. They had superb forging skills and could make many very special weapons and equipment. The enemy moved very fast after landing. Almost any Githyanki's warrior had extraordinary strength and agility, and their explosive ability was far above that of humans. Githyanki's, Astral Creature, Grade 3. Challenge Rating, 12, Personal Level, 15 has Psionic Spells. Highest and lowest attributes, 24, 12, Total Attribute Points, 95 to 105. Special Abilities, Psionic Spells, Mind Control, Astral Creature. Challenge Difficulty, A+. This was the challenge difficulty of adult Githyanki's. However, they often lived in groups, so if they encountered a group of Githyanki's, the challenge level would increase sharply, and the difficulty might even rise to S+. And Soren had been feeling uneasy after seeing them. Because there were so many Githyanki's, it must mean that there was a queen leader, and there was another quite dangerous creature. Red Dragon. Githyanki's had a racial characteristic. They could have abilities similar to the Dragon Covenant, and this special ability was called Red Dragon Agreement. Red Dragon Agreement. There is a special racial agreement between the Githyanki's and the Red Dragon, so that they can sometimes let the Red Dragon temporarily serve the Githyanki's like a horse, as long as they pay the corresponding price. When the Githyanki's trade with the Red Dragon, they will get a +4 racial bonus in the negotiation check. In a large group, the Githyanki's can reach a temporary alliance agreement with the Red Dragon, which can be decided by the Githyanki's governor and queen. A sharp whistling sound was heard. It seemed that what Soren was worried about finally happened. From the sky above the Githyanki's war fortress, the figure of an adult red dragon appeared. It looked at the witches below with cold and evil pupils, then opened its mouth and roared. Then it swooped down from the war fortress. When it was close to 300 meters above the ground, it flapped its dragon wings and soared into the sky. The red dragon hovered in the sky of the half-plane, but it was not in a hurry to attack the witches below. On the contrary, it had been deliberately keeping a distance. It seemed that it intended to let the Githyanki's below consume their spells first. A dragon's aura spread out. As the most powerful adult red dragon among the chromatic dragons, its size, strength, and spellcasting ability were far superior to the white dragon that Soren dealt with. It had the combat power of more than 3 adult white dragons. Chapter 3:14. The appearance of the red dragon undoubtedly made many people feel troubled. Even the head of the Northern Witch Council, Her Excellency the Eye of the North, could not help but frown and look at the dragon hovering in the sky. The dragon breath of the red dragon was the most powerful among the 5-color dragons. Its lethality was equivalent to twice that of the frost dragon breath of an adult white dragon. Therefore, the soul projections of all the witches present could only withstand 2 rounds of dragon breath attacks at most. Once the red dragon launched an attack, they had to take it down in 1 round of attacks. Otherwise, the casualties of the northern witches would be very serious. Group Human Immobilization Spell. Cloud of Death. Grease. What? Finger of Death. Disintegrate. Arbadaka's Withering. When the Githyankian warriors in front of them approached quickly, the first wave of spell attacks of the northern witches also broke out. As all the northern witches had a profession level of 15 and above, the spells they cast were completely overpowered. The AoE spell froze the 5 rank 3 warriors in the front, followed by the Death Cloud spell, Grease spell, and Spider Web spell. Finger of Death and Disintegrate spell were aimed at the enemies in the front, followed by Arbadaka's Withering spell, which covered the ground in front of them. The first wave of Githyankian warriors was completely annihilated. They didn't even reach 50 meters in front of the northern witches and fell under the spell attacks. High-grade spellcasters. Starting from profession level 10, the combat ability of spellcasters began to increase sharply. The higher the level, the more amazing it was. The northern territory was equivalent to a large kingdom, but there were only a dozen high-grade witches who were close to legendary. It was not difficult for them to work together to cast spells against an army, so the Githyankian warriors could not kill them. Soren waited quietly. The battle so far was just an appetizer. The Githyankian psionic warlocks, psionic warriors, and zealots had not appeared so far. The ordinary warriors rushing over in front of them were just testing the combat strength of the northern witches. There were many low-grade psionic warriors among the Githyankians. The combat strength of an adult Githyankian could reach grade 3. Enemy is approaching. Soren's ears suddenly moved and he whispered to Gloria beside him, "It's psionic stalker." A flash of magic appeared. Suddenly Soren's curved sword icing death appeared in his palm, and then he pounced on the corpse like a cheetah. His figure was as fast as a ghost, accompanied by a cold light, followed by the continuous sound of parrying and blocking. Finally, with a muffled sound, Soren's figure kicked the corpse in the chest and flew back nearly 6 meters. Then a stream of blood spurted out from the broken neck in front of him. The headless corpse flew upside down and fell to the ground with a bang. Annoying guy. Soren paused for a moment after landing, then shook his head and said in a deep voice, "Damn psionic ability." A row of data appeared. Shadow Strike successfully activated. Successfully activated sword form, beheading. You've dealt 116 beheading damage to the target. Target's fortitude failed. Target dead. Extracting soul energy. You've gained 5600 slaughter EXP. The slaughter EXP given by the Githyankians was still so high, but their psionic spells were still so disgusting. Even with Soren's will, it was still very uncomfortable when affected by their psionic spells. Soren's combat strength was amazing under the buff of all attributes. If he wasn't in the soul projection state now, he could probably surpass his peak combat strength. However, with so many northern witches around, and the legendary Eye of the North, Soren still had a lot of concerns in his heart. For example, he didn't dare to transform into a slaughter form at this time because he was worried that the northern witches would be interested in the Son of Slaughter. If a near-legendary spellcaster was interested in studying it, it would definitely not be a good thing. There are other psionic lurkers nearby. Soren's perception of rogues was very strong. As long as it was not a legendary rogue, he had a strong anti-detection ability. Detect invisibility. Hearing Soren's words, Gloria and the other witches around her immediately moved. With a flash of magic, 5 or 6 enemies immediately appeared within 100 meters. Spellcasters had strong magic abilities, but their tenacity, reflexes, and will were difficult to surpass melee professions. If Soren wasn't here, they might have to wait until the enemy was close enough, or they triggered a protective energy field when attacking them before they could find these rogues. Be careful. This time it was Her Excellency Eye of the North who spoke. She frowned and looked ahead, then raised her hand and threw out a spell. Dimensional Anchor. A force blocked the surrounding space, and then a thin Githyanki appeared out of thin air in front of them. It seemed to hit something and paused for a moment. Then it disappeared in an instant and reappeared 300 meters away. This was the psionic warlock of the Githyanki. There were not many wizards in this race, but there were many advanced psionic professions that were very difficult to deal with. Psionic abilities had many spell-like abilities, and they were relatively difficult to deal with. Soren used to hate fighting with psionic enemies the most. Clap, clap, clap. A burst of strange applause suddenly sounded. With the sound of clapping, all the nearby Githyanki retreated. Even the red dragon hovering in the sky, waiting for an opportunity to move, also retreated a little. Then they saw a crack in the astral fortress in front of them, like a gate opening from the middle. A group of fully armed Githyanki warriors with silver swords appeared. In the middle of them was a female creature with a pointed face and luxurious clothes. She was the empress of this group of Githyanki. In the eyes of these astral world natives, she was the supreme existence because worshipping the empress meant that they could not believe in the gods. Believing in the gods was betraying the empress. In every Githyanki group, there was such an empress, and her status was even higher than that of the drows. They were like the Queen of Blades, having almost absolute dominion over the group. The bloodline of the empress was sacred in the eyes of the Githyanki. There were less than 5 such rulers in the entire astral world, and half of them were in the form of liches. The one in front of them did not seem to be a lich. Then this proved that she was still very young and belonged to the new empress. Eye of the North. The empress of the Githyanki stood on the ground. The red dragon hovering in the sky roared, then slowly landed in front of her and lowered its head quite humbly. The empress with a pointed face stretched out her slender fingers and stroked the head of the red dragon. Then she looked up and said in a determined voice, "I said I would come back." Have you thought about it? Even now you're still unwilling to return that thing to us? You should know that if we don't get it back we'll never give up. Following her words, Yi Zichen's voice fell. The psionic warriors standing on her left and right all pulled out the silver blades behind them in unison as if they were a whole. The long-term military life made the Githyanki full of discipline. These enemies in front of them were all psionic warriors. They belonged to advanced professions and almost all of them were high-grade professions. In addition to being comparable to purebred warriors, these people also had a lot of spell-like psionic abilities. They were quite difficult to deal with. Standing behind them was a group of spellcasters in wizard robes. Although the Githyanki did not have many wizards, psionic warlocks could make up for the gap in this respect, and they also had many special advanced professions. For example, there were special professions such as psionic transmitter, fanatic, creator, observer, manipulator, and so on. The red dragon roared and rose into the air. The psionic warlock's figure floated in the air. The psionic warriors approached with silver blades in their hands. Hundreds of Githyanki warriors surrounded them. Just like what their empress had said, if they didn't get back what they wanted, they wouldn't give up. Even if it was a group of dangerous high-grade witches in front of them. What was it? Hearing the words of the Githyanki empress in front of them, whether it was Soren or the other northern witches, they all looked at the Eye of the North in front of them with doubts. It seemed that not only Soren was curious, but the other northern witches also didn't know what was in the hands of the Eye of the North. So much so that this group of Githyanki would not hesitate to jump from the astral world to directly attack the North to recapture it. What could make them willing to pay such a high price? They dared to challenge one of the few witch forces in the material plane, a council with more than half of the legendary witches. It wouldn't be much easier than challenging the gods. The Eye of the North in front of them did not answer. She just frowned and looked at the Githyanki empress in front of her as if she was thinking about something serious. But Soren seemed to remember something. He suddenly trembled, glanced at the Eye of the North in front of him, and then murmured in Gloria's ear, "Silver sword of Githyanki. If it's really it, things will be troublesome." Gloria seemed to be startled when she heard the words and then replied softly, "Isn't that artifact already destroyed?" Soren shook his head when he heard the words. It was not an easy task to completely destroy a +10 celestial artifact. Chapter 315. The Silver Sword of Gith. Any profession with more than 150 points of knowledge would more or less hear of its name, as well as its many legends. Because it was quite famous in history and it appeared many times one after another, so in many epic legends, there would be the figure of the Silver Sword of Gith. It was just that most of the time there were fragments of it. Many people had recast these fragments since ancient times, so there were many +6, +7, +8 Silver Swords of Gith in the legends. It was a very powerful artifact. Even if it had been recast many times, the Silver Sword of Gith was still a very powerful artifact. Because Soren's legendary curved sword was only +2. It was a sacred object of the Githyankis, and it was also the most powerful artifact that helped them defeat the Psychic Flare Empire and regain their freedom. The Silver Sword of Gith had a sacred meaning for the astral world race. It was also one of the most powerful artifacts that Soren knew in the world. Because the Silver Sword of Gith in its peak state was a +12 artifact, even if it was repeatedly destroyed and recast, it was restored to a +10 artifact at most. The strongest state of the Holy Avenger was only +7. This weapon ended an ancient empire, which was the terrible Psychic Flare Empire in the legends. There were ancient stories that classified psychic flares as creatures from other universes. This kind of monster that looked a bit like an octopus with two pairs of large and small tentacles, and was good at enslaving other races and eating the brains of other intelligent creatures as food, was believed by a small number of scholars to be from other Crystal Wall universes. They came in the age of the ancient gods, and once ruled a large territory in the multiverse, and eventually gradually weakened into dangerous monsters in the Underdark. That era. There were countless legendary spellcasters among the psychic flayers. But such a powerful psychic flayer empire that almost ruled the astral world and other planes was overthrown by the Githyankis with the help of the artifact. How powerful this artifact was could be imagined. Soren knew very little about the Silver Sword of Gith. The only thing he knew was that it had appeared in the time of troubles. Unfortunately, it was only a +6 Silver Sword of Gith. In the end, it killed a saint who was incarnated by a weak divine power. That was just a fragment of the reforged Silver Sword of Gith. The weapons of the Githyankis were very special. They had a very superb and wonderful forging process. It seemed that their top weapons could be reshaped, and even if they were destroyed they could be restored. Soren guessed that the only thing that could make them not give up was the silver sword of Gith. For the silence of the Eye of the North, the Queen of Gith looked angry. She opened her mouth and made a sharp sound. It was not a common language, but a mysterious language that even Gloria could not understand. Then she saw the warriors of Gith standing around her. They pulled out the silver swords at their waists. These strange weapons were completely different from the enemies in front of them, because they left a deep impression on people. After these silver swords were pulled out and thrown into the battle, their bodies turned into a silver fluid, constantly changing shape in the flow and flickering of the swords. Silver Blade +3. These guys' warriors were all equipped with weapons above Transcendent Rank 3. This kind of weapon was extremely dangerous. Not only did it have the ability to cut off the silver thread connected to the soul projection, but it also had the characteristic of beheading. To put it simply, this kind of weapon was very special. As long as one could use it normally, even if one did not master the sword form, beheading, one could use the advantage of the weapon to attack with the effect of beheading. Soren wanted to build a scimitar-style silver blade of Gith back then. It was for the sake of the beheading characteristic of the silver blade above the +3 level. Unfortunately, these Githyankies were too difficult to deal with. They were extremely resistant to their weapons falling into the hands of other creatures, so Soren could only go to the Underdark to build fine gold weapons. The Githyankies would do whatever it took to take back the silver blades that fell into the hands of others. Unless the target was too strong, they would give up on taking back the weapons. Perhaps they were also afraid that someone would figure out the secret of forging the silver blade of Gith. The main show is about to begin. When he saw a row of Gith warriors with +3 silver blades of Gith, all of whom were grade 4 or above, entering the battlefield, even Soren couldn't help but feel a little nervous. These guys were all psionic warriors and they could use low-level psionic spells. Their combat power was not comparable to those at the beginning. The simplest number could describe their combat power. In their hands they were holding +3 silver blades of Gith worth 49,000 Kindler, and they were wearing +3 armor of Gith worth 27,000 Kindler. As for other equipment, Soren didn't know, but it seemed that all of them were extraordinary level items. Kill them all. Take back the holy artifact. The Queen of Gith pulled out a long and narrow silver sword. This silver sword was as mysterious as flowing liquid. It was difficult for people who were not proficient in different weapons to use it. However, in the hands of the Queen of Gith, this conservative estimate of +5 silver blade of Gith was as flexible as a whip. The flowing silver sword looked a bit like a soft sword that was impossible to guard against, but it could become a sharp and hard beheading sword when needed. The shape of the silver blade of Gith could be changed, but it required psionic power to cooperate. Note, therefore it is difficult for other races to use the silver blade of Gith. Be careful. Soren looked at the enemy who was getting closer and closer in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Pay attention to the silver blades of the Gith warriors. They can change their shape and cut off the silver wire connecting your body." The +3 silver blade of Gith was a combination of soft sword, long sword, heavy sword, and beheading sword. At that time, many melee professions coveted this weapon, but in the end, only a few could bring back the finished product from the astral plane. And after getting the weapon, it was easy to be chased by the Githyankies across the plane. Dang, dang, dang. Soren didn't dare to be 50 meters away from the witch line. He didn't dare to be distracted to observe other people in this level of battle because the Gith warrior in front of him, who was about grade 4, gave him considerable psychological pressure. The Gith warrior didn't have such a strong mind control ability, but he had special psionic spells. For example, the pain that appeared on Soren's body just now was the psionic spell of the psionic warrior, which directly affected the pain on the spiritual level. Pain Strike. Level 1 psionic spell. The moment Soren was touched by the enemy, he suffered 6 points of mental damage. There was no wound on his body, but it was painful as if someone had cut open his stomach. Damn. The silver blade flowed like liquid, and it emitted dazzling light when it was waved. The enemy's fighting skills were quite brilliant. With the change of the weapon's shape, Soren almost felt a little difficult to fight back. Because a moment ago it was still a slashing attack with a heavy sword, and the next moment the silver blade became a long and narrow sword, and it could also turn slightly, as if it was holding a soft sword and shaking it out to attack. Soren's arm was stained with a little bit of silver because of this. With his current 29 points of dexterity, there was no way to completely avoid the attack. My enemy's strength. Level 2 psionic spell. It seemed that he also felt the advantage of Soren's attributes. After finding that the enemy in front of him was quite difficult to deal with, the Gith warrior suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed forward, and a psionic spell burst out. A row of data quickly emerged, attacked by psionic spells. Affected by absorption effect. Test of fortitude. Test of fortitude failed. You temporarily lost 2 points of strength. Strength will be transferred to the enemy within 15 minutes. Damn it. Soren's face changed slightly. He held his curved sword and twisted it violently. Then his figure rose into the air and turned into a cold light. Sword form, spinning strike. Shadow strike. Soren and the Gith warriors who were fighting turned into afterimages. On the other side, the battle of the northern witches also became quite fierce. In the face of enemies who far outnumbered them, the witches did not blindly cast spells to carry out a blanket attack. Instead, they cast summoning spells one after another. The Gith Yankees were born with psionic power. When their strength reached a certain level, even warriors could use spells such as Anywhere Door, Levitation, Blink, and other spells to teleport a short distance, so the blanket spells did not have a good effect on them. Except for spells above level 7, the rest were only suitable for bullying low-grade warriors. Level 3 Summon Monster. Summon Wind Elemental, Elder. Summon Earth Elemental, Elder. Summon Fire Elemental, Elder. Summon Neon Mist. Summon Demons. Summon Demons. A series of magic auras emerged, accompanied by portals. When this woman went crazy, she simply didn't care about her life. Those who summoned elementals were still okay, but those who dared to summon demons, even Soren couldn't help but frown. Fortunately, they released the Protect from Evil spell in advance. These demons did not care who summoned them, and they would even attack the spellcaster when they went crazy. The elementals summoned by the witches were quite powerful. In the front was an Earth Elemental Elder with a monster level of about 21, then the Wind Elemental Elder surrounded it, and the Fire Elemental Elder was waiting to move. More than a dozen high-grade witches summoned at the same time, and in an instant an army of monsters was formed. Scattered around were more than 30 monsters controlled by the level 3 Summon Monster spell, and a group of elementals blocked the enemy from approaching. The only thing that was more annoying was the 2 demons. For some reason, Soren had a strong feeling of wanting to kill them when he saw them. Chapter 316. ZZZ. Soren's figure kept retreating, and at the same time he suddenly reached out and tore off the outside half of his sleeve, pulling the distance to more than 15 meters. Just now, his spinning strike hit the opponent's body, but it seemed to have hit an invisible energy barrier, and was abruptly isolated a centimeter away. This was the psionic armor of the Gith warrior, which could withstand a certain amount of damage and could cover any armor. It meant that Soren had broken the psionic armor, but he also had to break the Gith armor +3, which was equivalent to a plate armor. The guy in front of him was like an iron can. For the first time, Soren had such a strong feeling of not knowing where to start. Maybe he really came here too early. The astral plane should be a place to explore after reaching the legendary level. This kind of enemy who challenged across planes had too many strange means. However, what really made Soren feel dangerous was not the enemy's defensive ability, but the Gith warrior in front of him actually opened his mouth and spat out a dragon's breath. Black Dragon's Breath. Level 3 Psionic Spell. This sudden Black Dragon's Breath made Soren unable to defend himself at all. If it weren't for his amazing dexterity, he would have been hit directly in the head. Even so, it caused nearly 18 points of strong acid damage to him, and a layer of skin on his left arm was corroded. This was not a complete version of the Black Dragon's Breath. Even the Draken's and Dragon Disciples' breath were not as good as it. However, it was still a psionic replica of the Dragon's Breath attack. The acid effect of the Black Dragon's Breath was simply as big as 2 heads for Soren. How many strange means does this guy have? Soren was a little nervous. The Gith warrior in front of him was quite difficult to deal with. He felt like he was dealing with an enemy who practiced both magic and martial arts. This was the astral plane. Not only the people who entered here could cast spells instantly, but the people who lived here could also cast spells instantly. That was why Soren did not dare to be too far away from the witches. He was afraid that he would be killed by a psionic warlock directly. After all, spells were unpredictable, and even legendary warriors as strong as dragons did not like to take Finger of Death, or disintegrate head-on. The psionic warrior in front of him was also an instant spellcaster. As a special advanced warrior profession, his spellcasting level was not high. It was basically impossible for him to have spells above the 6th circle, so most of his psionic spells were instant cast. However, because his intelligence wasn't high, he didn't know many spells. Instant cast. Soren also had the ability to cast instant spells, but he had no intention of using it, because he was waiting for an opportunity. In other words, he was creating an opportunity for himself, an opportunity to kill the enemy in one strike. From the beginning to the end, he did not use any spells. He fought like a purebred rogue, and he was the kind of rogue that looked very professional and brilliant at first glance. Therefore, in the eyes of the Gith warrior, there was more than a 60% chance that he would think that Soren did not have the ability to cast spells. Because of several combat opportunities, if Soren knew any spells, he could slightly reverse the situation. Soren was hit twice, but he couldn't even break the opponent's psionic defense. The Gith warrior did not give Soren a chance to open up the distance, and the battle on the side had begun to stir. Some high-grade Gith professions broke through the defense line of the elemental army and closed the distance to within 50 meters of the witches. The distance here was quite dangerous for the witches, but it was also dangerous for them. Only 3 to 5, Disintegrate, and Finger of Death, were shot out in succession, and 3 Gith warriors were killed under the spell attack. Group Human Immobilization. Gloria's voice came from behind Soren. When her spell was over, a witch immediately controlled a giant earth elemental to smash it. However, the earth elemental attack did not kill the enemy, because of the psionic warrior's psionic shield, and also because they had a strong defensive ability and vitality as a warrior. The Eye of the North blocked the space near the witches, and the Gith's Blink and Anywhere Door spells were all ineffective, which made them unable to use Space Jump to rush to the witches. After all, this half-bit wall was the territory of the northern witches, and the Gith had an innate disadvantage in the rules of the half-bit wall. However, the situation was not so optimistic because the northern witches were only a dozen strong, but the enemy in front of them was a group of Gith. It was estimated that the enemy still had thousands of combatants, as well as a red dragon that had not yet fought. Dispel Spell. Disintegrate. Greater Dispel Magic Wall. Spell Protection Barrier. Continuous spells appeared, some of which even Soren could not distinguish. These spells came from the northern witches and psionic warlocks. Although the Gith did not have many powerful wizards, they had a large number of psionic warlocks. They might have a gap in the number of spells, but they could still threaten the existence of the northern witches by relying on their numbers. At the very least, they were still trying to dispel the northern witches' energy defensive force fields, even though their spellcasting levels were lower than the witches. Once the energy shield was removed, most of the witches present would not be able to withstand 2 attacks from the psionic warrior. Clang. Soren twisted his waist and stepped away from the enemy's attack, but he did not expect that the silver blade in the enemy's hand would turn into a silver soft sword in the next moment. With a flick of the opponent's wrist, the sword directly pierced into Soren's waist. Psionic energy could change the shape of the Gith silver blade, and the consumption was equivalent to a level 1 psionic spell. In battle, this was the attack that Soren was most afraid of. The blade flowed like a silver liquid. This +3 silver blade that cost nearly 50,000 Kindler pierced through Soren's shield, and blood immediately gushed out. Good chance. The Gith warrior in front of him seemed to find that this was a good opportunity to directly end the enemy's life. The whole person suddenly rushed forward to assassinate. The Gith silver blade turned into a huge beheading sword under the psionic energy, and a cold light directly cut through Soren's head. Sword form, beheading. Soren did not expect that after fighting so many times, this time he would be attacked by the sword form, beheading. However, this was the best opportunity for him. Because the sword form, beheading, was one of the moves that Soren was most familiar with, he knew where the weakness of this move was, and he knew very well that when the sword form, beheading, was launched, it meant that the enemy had exhausted all his strength. Arcane Missile *3. Arcane Missile, Empower Spell, *3. Theoretically speaking, Soren was indeed forced into a corner by the enemy's continuous attacks. That was to say, he had no room to dodge at all, and he could not avoid the changed shape of the Gith silver blade. Therefore, in the eyes of the Gith warrior, the only thing that Soren could do was to resist, which meant that he would be continuously attacked. The beheading characteristic of the Gith's silver blade gave it a terrible continuous lethality. Imagination was very beautiful, but the reality was quite cruel. In fact, Soren only had one trump card to turn the tables. That was the most basic level 1 spell that wizards mastered, Arcane Missile. This spell should have been very difficult to threaten the Gith warrior in front of him, but if it was in the astral plane it would be different, because there was instant cast here. Due to the limited number of spells he had mastered as a half-baked wizard, Soren had memorized a lot of arcane missiles. Originally he had used the ability, Empower Spell, to memorize all the level 2 spells into level 3 spells. So now all the level 2 spell slots had been replaced with the enhanced version of Arcane Missile. Therefore, at the moment when Soren launched a counterattack, there were a total of 15 ordinary arcane missiles and 15 enhanced arcane missiles with 50% lethality. All 30 arcane missiles hit the enemy's abdomen. The psionic shield of the Gith warrior in front of him was almost broken in an instant, and then the arcane missiles hit the opponent's armor. The continuous close-range explosions hit the weakest point of the armor, and he could not help but fly upside down. Soren's explosion at this moment was completely beyond the enemy's expectation. He felt like he was hit by 30 bullets at the same time at close range, and he suddenly felt very uncomfortable. The astral plane was the stage of spellcasters. Instant cast greatly enhanced their combat power, but it also reduced their endurance. Shang. Soren instant cast all the arcane missiles in one breath, and then slashed his curved sword at the opponent's neck in an instant. Sword form, beheading. An eye for an eye. Soren's eyes were fierce, and in the fountain of blood, he swung his sword and cut off the head of the high-grade Gith warrior in front of him. Plop. A headless body fell to the ground. A series of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Activated sword form, beheading. You've dealt 126 beheading damage to the target. Beheading successful. Target dead. Extracting soul energy. You've gained 8150 slaughter EXP. Battle experience. You've gained part of the information of the ability, proficient spellcasting in the battle. You've gained part of the information of the ability, combat spellcasting in the battle. Soren did not look at the data that appeared. After killing the enemy in front of him, he first took a breath, and then quickly picked up the silver sword of Gith +3. The silver sword seemed very heavy, because in the hands of non-Gith Yankees, others who use it must accept a alien weapon punishment. However, Soren just frowned slightly. After holding the hilt of the silver sword, he shook it gently. Then he saw the silver light flowing, and the silver sword in his hand turned into the most basic form of a long sword. At the same time, the heavy and sluggish feeling gradually disappeared. Omnipotent hands, legendary skill. Blood dripped down the palm of his hand. Soren held the legendary curved sword in one hand and the silver sword of Gith +3 in the other hand, standing in place with a cold expression. Roar. A dull dragon's roar sounded. The red dragon hovering in the sky finally felt that it was time. It roared and swooped down toward the enemy below. At the same time, it opened its mouth and spat out a hot red dragon's breath. The temperature rose sharply. Under the breath of the most powerful adult red dragon of the 5 colors, the nearby temperature seemed to rise a lot. Chapter 317. Omnipotent Hands. In theory, this allowed Soren to use any equipment and weapons. So when he picked up the silver sword of Gith, it was only a moment of discomfort, and then he mastered the skill of using it very flexibly. Unfortunately, this kind of weapon must be mastered to fully exert its effect. So when Soren picked it up, the silver sword was the most basic form of a long sword, and he couldn't use psionic power to change the shape of the silver sword of Gith. When Soren held it, it was like a silver blade that emitted light, and when the Githyankies used it, it was like a flowing silver liquid. However, even so, its lethality was still very amazing. Item type: Silver Sword of Gith, +3. Item grade: Rare, grade 3. Item description: This is a weapon forged with special skills and enchantment craftsmanship. Only the Githyankies who live in the astral world can forge this kind of special equipment. When the Silver Sword of Gith is pulled out, it is like a flowing silver liquid, and it needs the corresponding psionic power to perfectly exert its effect. The Silver Sword of Gith has far more lethality than the rare weapons of the same level, but to use it, one must master the ability, Strange Weapon. Please note that this weapon is very powerful, but it is also very dangerous because any outsider holding the silver sword of Gith may be located by the Githyanki's, and then they will do everything to get it back. Equipment requirements: Xenogenic weapon specialty equipment effect. Astral weapon beheading characteristic silver line cut form change +3 sharpness, +3 penetration, +3 toughness, +1 armor break. Weapon special effect. Astral weapon. Astral weapon uses special materials and can cause normal damage to any enemy, so no enemy can be immune to the attack of astral weapon. Weapon special effect. Beheading characteristic. This weapon has a natural beheading characteristic, and it was forged to be more suitable for beheading attacks. Without mastering the beheading characteristic, any beheading attack with this weapon is equivalent to mastering the basic effect of the beheading characteristic. If you have the beheading characteristic, it will make the weapon more lethal. Weapon special effect. Silver line cut. The silver sword of the Githyanki's can cut the silver line connected to the soul, forcing the enemy to return to the body and suffer a certain amount of damage. Please note that only soul projections have the silver thread. Living beings with physical bodies in the astral world do not have the silver thread. Weapon characteristics. Transformation. The silver blade of Gith can change its shape. When it enters the battle, the blade emits a silver stream of light. With psionic power, it can change into the shape of a long sword, a heavy sword, a beheading sword, etc. There are certain limitations to this form change. At most, it can only change a part of its form. A rank 3 extraordinary weapon. But in terms of weapon lethality, the silver blade of Gith was definitely a legendary level equipment. Its attack power and armor-piercing ability were not as good as the legendary curved sword Icing Death, but the Gith silver blade had quite a lot of characteristics, and it also had the characteristics of cutting the silver line in the astral world and beheading attacks. This weapon was much stronger than Soren's Scimitar +1. Since Soren had the talent, greater dual wielding, it was only natural that he needed to wield 2 weapons in order to maximize his combat prowess. With his omnipotent hands, he did not suffer too much punishment when using the Gith silver blade. On the contrary, he seemed to be quite proficient in it. Boom. The sound of a violent explosion came from afar. As more and more Githyanki's rushed to the front of the northern witches, the witches also began to cast lethal evocation spells. They raised the staffs in their hands and with a series of spells, fireballs, icicles, acid arrows and so on which had been stored in them, also attacked the Githyanki's warriors in front of them one after another. The casualties of the enemy began to increase, but the situation of the northern witches was also a bit dangerous because after the distance was narrowed to a certain extent, the Githyanki's could already attack their energy protection field. Brr. There was a dull roar. Solon looked up at the sky and couldn't help but curse. He then ran back as if his life depended on it. Red Dragon. This was the most powerful and cunning creature among the 5-colored dragons. As expected, it chose Soren as its target. It was ready to burn this little human to death first. The bird that sticks out gets shot. The bird that sticks out may not only be the strongest and the most conspicuous, but it may also be the weakest and the easiest to deal with. The damn red dragon was such a creature. As the largest, strongest, and fiercest creature among the chromatic dragons, although the red dragon had a rather arrogant character, it liked to deal with the weakest enemies first in battle. They liked to defeat their enemies one by one, kill the weakest enemies first and then kill the target one by one and finally leave the enemy alone. Therefore, when dealing with the red dragon, the weakest person was the most dangerous. If the red dragon couldn't see which one was the weakest, it would attack the one that was the easiest to deal with. All of the northern witches present were high-grade northern witches, so Sauron was undoubtedly the weakest and the easiest to deal with. Therefore, the red dragon locked on to him as its first target. Its huge body swooped down, but it did not directly attack Soren with its claws. Instead, it took a deep breath in the air, and then opened its mouth to spit out a scorching dragon's breath. Evade sight. Shadow jump. Soren's figure suddenly disappeared. He could barely tank the white dragon's breath, but he definitely wouldn't dare to tank the red dragon's breath. This was because the red dragon's breath was the most powerful among the chromatic dragons. If one didn't have any constitution or fire resistance, the red dragon's breath could deal about 120 fire damage. Under normal circumstances, a level 1 warrior's HP was about 15, which meant that the place where it breathed would be directly cleared out like a plow. This was also why the red dragon had appeared the most in epics and legends since ancient times, and also the reason why it represented the most danger. The surging heat wave chased after him. Soren had no choice but to use shadow jump, and then appeared behind an earth elemental in front of him. The red dragon's huge body chased after him from behind. Although it was a little surprised by the cunning enemy's escape as a dragon, it did not care at all. Because it was an adult red dragon, which meant that it was strong and had amazing strength, and it also meant that it could continuously use dragon's breath. The scorching hot dragon's breath directly cleared out a burn mark on the ground. The earth elemental that Soren had used shadow jump was enveloped by the dragon's breath, and it only lasted for 2 seconds before it turned into a pile of half-crystallized fragments. Red dragon fire. The hottest kind of fire in the mortal world. Careful. Gloria's scream came from the front, and then a fire protection buff was cast on Soren. At this time, Soren no longer had the energy to look around. Instead, he awkwardly rolled and dodged and then jumped as far as possible to the right as possible. The dragon's breath came from behind him. The speed on the ground would never be faster than the speed of flying. Soren felt a burning breath coming from behind, and then a dragon's breath enveloped him in a sea of fire. He still could not avoid it. The red dragon's breath covered nearly twice the area of other dragons, and the sea of fire they spat out could last for half a minute. In short, when the red dragon launched its dragon's breath, it could fly all the way from one side of the town to the other side, and then spit out a sea of fire in a straight line. The largest distance Soren had ever seen was a wall of fire about 30 meters wide and 600 meters long. The red dragon's huge body gave it an even more amazing lung capacity. The scorching dragon's breath enveloped Soren, and for a moment he felt a burning sensation all over his body. Although the fire protection cast by the witch absorbed hundreds of damage from the dragon's breath, Soren's HP was still decreasing at a rate of 20 to 30 points. His extraordinary physique gave him a certain degree of toughness and immunity, but Soren still couldn't withstand the dragon's breath for a long time. He felt as if he had entered a furnace, and his flesh and blood were about to be burnt. However, just when Soren felt that he was about to enter a state of serious injury, the legendary curved sword in his hand suddenly burst out a dazzling light. A cold force poured into Soren's body. It offset the scorching dragon's breath that enveloped him, and at the same time reduced the damage he suffered. The blade of icing death burst out a dazzling light, and this silver light was more obvious and dazzling than the silver sword of Gith. It was as eye-catching as a torch, and the light on it could not be extinguished at all. The scorching dragon's breath enveloped Soren's surroundings, but the temperature of icing death dropped below zero. It transmitted a cold force to Soren's body, constantly offsetting the damage of the red dragon's breath, and even emitted a magic aura to extinguish the surrounding flames. It woke up. As a legendary curved sword, the moment it woke up, Soren felt a will which was as simple as an animal's. This will was telling Soren that it had woken up. It was also activating the ability it had in the past. The cold breath escaped, and Soren's fire damage was getting lower and lower. The nearby flames that were burning because of the dragon's breath were gradually extinguished. The curved sword, icing death. For some reason that Soren did not know, it woke up the moment it suffered the red dragon's breath. When it woke up, the ability that it had lost for some reason in the past began to recover. As a curved sword in the epic legend, its ability was definitely not only very sharp and added a little cold damage. Chapter 318. The huge body of the red dragon roared through the air. The overconfident character of the red dragon did not even check whether Soren was dead or not. In the red dragon's knowledge, even a grade 4 warrior would find it difficult to survive the dragon's breath, let alone Soren, who was just a rogue who did not seem to have thick skin. Rogues were the weakest melee professions. Even if they advanced into the realm of legends, they would still be in a state of near death from the red dragon's dragon breath. Soren's injury was actually not that serious. The scorching dragon breath reduced his HP by more than 1/3 and brought him hundreds of damage. However, when the dazzling light appeared on the curved sword icing death, the damage he suffered began to be greatly reduced. The curved sword had once helped a powerful legendary figure fight against the Baler. As a higher demon in the bottomless abyss, any creature that approached it would be fatally burned. Therefore, in other words, the burning damage of the Baler's flames was not much worse than the dragon breath of the red dragon. It could resist the flames of the Baler's body, and naturally, it could also resist the dragon breath of the red dragon. Soren's figure stood in the fire. The raging flames were burning around him, but the speed of his HP reduction had slowed down to single digits. This level of fire damage was not fatal. At least it gave him the ability to resist the dragon breath once or twice. He would not be in a state of near death from the dragon breath. However, the injuries on his body were still very troublesome. Soren glanced at the red dragon that circled in the air and came back again. There was a cold light in his eyes as well as a strong murderous intent. Level up the profession of shadow dancer. For so long, Soren had been restraining his desire to level up his profession in order to have the ability to turn the tables when necessary. He knew very well that he was best at the fighting style of a rogue. As a wizard, he was simply an unqualified dabbler. Therefore, even if he had the slaughter EXP to level up his wizard profession, Soren still stored it there. This was because if Soren encountered a battle that was beyond his capabilities, 1 or 2 wizard levels would be useless. On the contrary, 1 or 2 rogue levels would greatly increase Soren's combat prowess. Wizards really needed to accumulate experience. It would take at least 20 years for a native wizard to take shape. Soren had only been a part-time wizard for less than 3 months. In 3 months he had walked the path that other magi had taken 3 years to complete. However, he was not a god after all. There was no way he could complete the 30-year journey of other adepts in 3 months. Even if he had a relatively high sorcerer rank, it still wouldn't work. A row of data appeared before his eyes. The shadow dancer profession has been upgraded to level 4. Received 31 DX 25 plus INT 21 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 14, profession HP 8 plus, con 22 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Mastered the shadow dancer's innate ability, Shadow Leap. Promoted to a class 4 professional. Obtained an additional specialty point. The shadow dancer profession has been upgraded to level 5. Received 31 DX 25 plus INT 21 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 14, profession HP 8 plus, con 22 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Mastered the shadow dancer's innate ability, Roll Dodge. Received an additional free attribute point. Received an specialty point. The total rogue profession level is 12. Received an additional weapon point. All the slaughter EXP was consumed like flowing water, but Soren's rogue level had increased in a straight line. His total rogue level had reached 12. Not only did he get an additional free attribute point and specialty point, and an additional weapon point. At the same time, after his total profession level had reached class 4, Soren also got an additional specialty point. Therefore, after he had consecutively upgraded 2 profession levels, his strength could be said to have increased explosively. Choose the ability, Danger Sense. Soren's figure flew out of the sea of fire. When he upgraded the rogue's profession level, the first ability he chose was Danger Sense. This was the most powerful superpower evasion ability. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't have enough experience before, he would have chosen it very early on. Because Danger Sense was a superpower evasion ability, it didn't require too much judgment at all. He could directly get the sixth sense buff from the perception aspect. Instinctive Evasion, special ability. From now on, you will have a strong instinctive evasion ability. When you are caught off guard or when you are attacked by an invisible enemy, you can retain the reflexive evasion ability brought by your agility. And from now on, you will have a weak sixth sense. You can feel the attack launched against you in advance. This prediction ability is affected by the perception bonus. Note, the higher the perception, the stronger the ability to predict attacks. As he mastered the special ability, Intuition, Soren's body suddenly moved. Then, without looking back, he directly blocked an arrow from behind with his curved sword. With a crisp clang, Soren's figure disappeared into the shadows. He had entered stealth mode. This was the power of Danger Sense. He could rely on his intuition to predict. Although Soren's perception wasn't very high, the bonus of 16 points of perception was equivalent to at least 3 points of evasion. Consumed 1 weapon point to learn the ability, Grandmaster, Curved Sword. Soren's eyes were cold. He locked his eyes on the red dragon in the sky. At the same time, he was completely invisible and followed the red dragon's flight path. He was waiting for the red dragon to land because the dragon's breath couldn't be sustained for a long time. When the first round of dragon's breath was over, the red dragon would try to dive down to attack the enemy. Then it would launch a round of fierce dragon wing attack, and at the same time sweep its tail as the final killing move. It wasn't the first time Soren dealt with dragons. Their biological habits were very similar. As long as someone attracted their attention, Soren could find a chance to sneak attack the opponent. But before that, he still needed to improve his lethality. The ability, Danger Sense, had greatly increased his survivability, so the next thing he needed to improve was his combat ability. Soren was ready to get his first legendary combat ability at this moment. Consumed 1 weapon point to learn the ability, Legendary, Curved Sword. As the last weapon point was consumed, the legendary curved sword in Soren's hand, Icing Death, seemed to have sensed something and made a cheerful sound. It was like the pleasant sound of the blade being flicked. As a legendary curved sword with a simple mind, it seemed to feel that its master's ability when using it was comparable to those epic and legendary figures. Curved Sword, Legendary, you are already a legendary master who uses curved swords. There are few people in the world who are better at using curved swords than you. Your ability to control this weapon is comparable to the legendary Sword Saint. It's not an exaggeration to say that you are extraordinary. I'm afraid that in the whole world only a few epic figures or some gods who like to use curved swords can compete with your ability to control this weapon. This weapon has become a part of your body. You can use it at any time to cause more damage. Accuracy +5, damage +5, attack speed +3, critical strike multiplier +1, fatal strike +1. It was a very wonderful state. When Soren upgraded his ability to Curved Sword, Legendary, he seemed to have entered a wonderful state for a moment. He could feel the simple consciousness of the legendary curved sword, Icing Death. He could feel the touch of the air on the blade. It was as if his skin nerves had extended to the curved sword. The air was blowing on the blade of the curved sword, but he felt as if the air was blowing on his skin. It was a very wonderful feeling. It was as if the curved sword had become a part of his body. He could clearly feel the air when the curved sword was waving, the trembling of the blade when blocking the enemy's attack, and how small the deviation of the next attack would be, and how much impact it would have when hitting the enemy. Because even the air resistance in contact with the curved sword was in Soren's perception. It was wonderful. Soren actually had a feeling of one with the sword. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.